A male could be seen panting heavily while making his way through a building, reaching the top of the flight of stairs while still processing everything that had happened, and how he was in the game world that he had always played when he was previously a player of said game. As he stared at the reflection of himself in the window, the dark-haired male wondered if he should get a cheat skill to be feared, confused as to why he was in the form he was currently in. But how did this all start? It was a normal day for the male who had a video game wallpaper on his work computer, glancing over at the clock in his workplace, which made him freeze in place, while waiting for the hands to hit a certain time. When it was 5:30, the dark-haired male abruptly stood up from his seat and put on his backpack, telling the others good work, as was customary when leaving a workplace. The door made a click, and the others continued on with their daily work, annoyed at the behavior of the male, since he had really gone home on time in such a situation, and assumed it was likely because of a certain video game. They were surprised to see this male so desperate like this, even though it was just a stupid game in their eyes. The male walked into his apartment where there were posters and a shelf filled with figurines, immediately grabbing at his headset. He realized that he got home a little faster when it was only a 10-minute walk away from his workplace, just to play the Dungeon Explorer Chronicle, or Dunx for short. As he put the virtual headset on, our protagonist could feel himself going through that familiar transitional feeling into the game. With the beautiful graphics and action, Dunx took over the VR MMO game genre. Back then, there were even times when the game went unnoticed, but with its quality and content, it had become a big name, and there was no gamer who didn't know about it. When the dark-haired male entered the game, he realized there was a monster behind him, reminding him that he had left in a rush previously and saved in a weird place. The golem tried to attack the male, but he knew how to get by in the game he was addicted to. After a while of playing, he realized the time and took a break to get a drink. The game's update was at 6 p.m., so he felt glad that his work was over an hour before. One of the reasons why he chose that workplace, after all. He couldn't miss out on it since he was selected as a beta tester for this update, which was meant to be large scale. All beta testers would be rewarded if they did well in the event, but the male couldn't help but get excited just by the sound of the update. Even if it was a little early, he saw that other people were there, and seemingly making friends with each other. The aura was putting him off, but the male realized that he was nervous, attempting to calm himself down while in the presence of other testers. Testers were the few players who were able to glimpse the future, and the event that was magnifying his nervous feelings. But it was going to be okay since he wasn't the average player. At least, that's what he thought. 6 o'clock struck and rumbling could be heard, as the dark-haired male turned around and widened his eyes in shock, as something towered over the entire area. Much time after the event, the male found himself waking with an indescribable expression, walking to work as normal and typing away at his desk while people would wonder what was going on with him. He was still going home on time and his desk was still filled with merch, but he seemed to not be that desperate anymore. When he left to return home again, he thought about how a couple of weeks had passed. In conclusion, the event was one of the most exhausting ones he had been through. A huge dragon suddenly fell and destroyed 10% of the players from the start, immediately firing off lasers randomly when it got up, and it had thick skin to prevent damage. After sacrificing half of the participants, people were able to defeat the dragon. But that was only the start of the event. The venue collapsed and people had to find a way to exit the death game, along with there being a time limit, and a lot of instant kill traps and strong monsters that would blast people away with ease. Even so, our protagonist was not doing the worst, and was able to slash through some of the monsters before more would appear. The only thing that a person could count on was their luck, and this whole event was something that no one other than our protagonist could clear, making the dark-haired male jump for joy in the middle of his walk home. He returned, took a shower, and ate a meal before immediately jumping into the game, looking forward to the update mail that he received, checking it and getting scared by the amount of text. It was an agreement contract that said he would get transported when he started the game, confusing him, until he dismissed it as just the admins being crazy, and that he shouldn't think too deeply. It asked if he wanted to choose his character or let the game automatically choose, to which the male thought it would take too much time to do himself, so he picked automatic. And it sent him to an area where he sat in an auditorium with a familiar man and other familiar students who stood out. With all of this, our protagonist realized that he was in Dunx's opening scene, continuing to listen to the speech while confused about what was going on, since everything felt more real than usual computer graphics. He tried to calm himself down while gathering his thoughts, knowing that this didn't seem to be the actual game since he couldn't even feel the goggles. If this wasn't a dream, it seemed as though he was really transported into the game. But there were two possibilities. His consciousness was transported, or his whole body was overwritten into this new body. But he couldn't figure it out until he logged out. In the game, that would only happen after moving to the classroom. But our protagonist wondered if he really wanted to go home. His class was told to exit and he realized he was in Class E, that class having the lowest status among all 5 classes, but it seemed to be better than getting bullied by those of higher status. The question of returning popped up again, and he had a lot of responsibilities, but he wanted to be overpowered in this world and get involved with his favorite character, along with most of the heroines being enrolled in this class. He believed he was transported in a favorable condition, and wanted to enjoy the world to its fullest, but he was confused as to why he was out of breath just from the stairs. When he saw his reflection in the window, he slammed against it with disbelief when he recognized it, remembering this character to be someone who repeatedly approached one of the heroines and kept harassing her and the main character, leading to the character getting defeated and expelled. Narumi Sauta, who was nicknamed Butao, which meant pig. That body was going to be trouble for him both physically and socially, especially since the heroine that this character approached was Hayase Kaoru, a person who didn't treat anyone differently except for Butao. Along with that, the character had already harassed her even before the entrance ceremony, so she should already hate Butao, someone who isn't even the main character's rival. Even if our protagonist had no feelings for this character, Butao was just an unpleasant mob character, so it seemed as though autopick was the wrong move. After this, Kaoru was going to become the core of the main characters, so he didn't want to do anything conspicuous. But that was when the dark-haired male felt an uneasy feeling that wasn't his own emotions. He realized that some of Butao's memories and feelings might have remained, making the problems increase. The male decided to dismiss this and just go to class, as there was still a chance he could log out, since he was transported in the first place. But this was no longer the game world that he knew. Now that he was Butao, Dunx's storyline was going to break, but he still wanted to try and get on good terms with Kaoru. When he walked through the doorway, the girl looked in his direction, making him gain a bit of hope, before she started to glare intensely, which confirmed there was likely no way to get on good terms. Thus, our protagonist's first time transported to another world was starting. As the dark-haired male entered the class and saw Kaoru glare at him before turning her face away with her head leaning on her hand, the male started to tear up and chuckle to himself as he was able to confirm her despise for Butao. Our protagonist hummed and thought, and knew that the seat placement was based on our grades, meaning he couldn't randomly sit wherever he liked, finally finding his name tag, which had the desk placed at the furthest possible place. Another problem was placed on top of the others, and the male knew that he was the lowest ranking student, but this was the adventurer's school that had the entrance exam, which should have been 100 times harder than other schools, as this was a super elite school. Our protagonist didn't know how he did it, but Butao somehow won against the entrance exam, and getting enrolled here alone was incredible, so he should try to have some confidence. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of someone else walking into the classroom, a man in a suit who told everyone to go to their seats as he was going to start the homeroom session. This man was Murai Hajime, an alumni of Adventurers University, and he did a simple self-introduction before explaining about the school, still following Dunx's scenario as normal. This was Dunx's scenario, but the young male witnessed everything firsthand in reality, and realized that everything had a different information density, feeling he could feel the weight of every word that Murai was saying. The male could feel the anxiety of his classmates, but that was how it was supposed to be. Speaking of adventurers in this world, it was a promising profession that got the limelight, and was a name given to those who were allowed to dive into dungeons. But the competition at the school was tough. Just being a student from this school had its own privileges, but our protagonist already knew most of it, even if nothing felt real to him. However, he couldn't go back for a while, and he thought it would be better if he just started thinking seriously about his career in this world. Fortunately, as expected from an elite school, there were a lot of options to do after graduating, such as being scouted, since students would dive into dungeons as lessons. To begin with, Dunx got its name from the fact that they used dungeon exploring as the theme, and it was necessary to have this high focus, since resources from the dungeon would help support the energy industry. For companies and institutions that wanted to progress their dungeon research, this was the best place to hunt for them. For the sake of his future, our protagonist wanted to dive more aggressively, but there were going to be problems. The teacher told everyone that they had each other to work together with, and started handing over the terminals they were going to wear, calling the young male last as expected. If he could return to his previous world, then all his worry would be for nothing. The terminal looked just like a wristwatch, and was the menu in Dunx, having usual smartphone features and many others, such as checking status and logging out. When he opened up the terminal, the screen showed his own current status, but he realized the stats were extremely low, causing him to feel even more angry since the problems kept stacking up. But he still hoped for a logout function. Alas, there wasn't one. At the same time, in Class D, the teacher left and everyone stayed seated at their desks. There was a short-haired male who was lying in someone's lap, and a student piped up, asking someone how long she should stay sitting, to which the long dark-haired man said until Kariya woke up. This man told everyone to relax, as he was going to head out soon and raid Class E soon enough. Back to Class E, our protagonist was sad that he had no idea how to return, but this was his dream, even despite being transported as Butao. When he checked his status, he saw a glutton skill, and despite having played Dunx for years, didn't even know what it is. To get a skill from the start was pretty rare, but he had no idea how to use it, and it sounded like it was a skill to eat a huge amount of food, making him wonder if it was there because he was fat. Either way, his thoughts were interrupted when he saw a group of people walking into the classroom with serious expressions, one of them shouting at everyone to listen up. He announced that the tall man was from Class D, and was named Kariya Isamu, and that he was going to pick someone to be his subordinate, ordering everyone to show their status and skills. Suddenly, a voice called out, and that came from Kaoru, who stood up, telling the group they had no reason to show their skills, causing others to have the confidence to agree. The male of the group who spoke questioned who the girl was, reminding the class of their status before walking up, and asking Kaoru if she thought they were equals, when his class had been diving into dungeons since they were 12 years old. He told them that their levels were different, and that his words were in order, seemingly giving off an intimidating aura that affected the entire class, including our protagonist. This effect caused the young male to realize what was happening, but everyone saw Kaoru get too affected by the aura and decided to back down. The male asked if anyone else wanted to complain, but the young male knew that this ability, aura, was something that could be used in special places like dungeons towards others with lower levels, in order to intimidate them. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the man calling out to him, wanting to see Saota's stats first. The young male looked toward the equally overweight male and was confused by the fact that this man called him fat, but he got up and showed his terminal anyway. With a laugh, the male said that our protagonist's status was too low, and that they didn't need him, making Saota wish to punch the guy, but he was going to act like the weak guy for now. This man called upon the next student, and he made a female student come up next, one with long hair, a timid face, and a curvy body. She sweat-dropped and fidgeted with her hands before the long, dark-haired male asked her what her name was, making her hesitate for a moment before saying it was Sanjo Sakurako. The male ordered her to show her terminal as expected, but our protagonist recognized the girl whose nickname was Pink due to the color of her hair, and she was one of the heroines in Dunx, also being a special playable character. Through her perspective, a player can find the male character's route, and she was one of the reasons why Dunx was a big hit. The long dark-haired man checked her terminal and saw she was a level 1 as expected, while her abilities were questionable, but he grinned evilly and said that he was going to give her special treatment and let her into their party since she was cute. The girl didn't know how to react and started to shake anxiously, similar to how everyone else in the class was paralyzed by fear from the sheer difference in power. Even if everyone in Class E grouped together, they still wouldn't be able to defeat Kariya, but our protagonist knew that Pink wouldn't be taken away by these men. As the long dark-haired male tried to grab at the girl, he asked why she had such a negative reaction when she should be happy, but his hand was roughly grabbed by a boy in the class who glared at the male, and shouted that the girl obviously didn't like that. This was the scene where the main character of the game showed up. Kaoru stood there, frozen in shock, while thinking about the reason why she enrolled in the adventurous school in the first place. Her eyes were wide as she looked forward at the red-haired male, who stopped the long dark-haired man from grabbing at Sanjo. The other male felt a vein pop in frustrated confusion, pulling his arm back while questioning the red-haired male's words, and trying to say that Sanjo was happy about this, even though it was obvious that she wasn't. After asking who the red-haired male was, he introduced himself as Akagi Yuma, proclaiming himself to be the soon-to-be strongest man in the school. Everyone seemed surprised by the declaration, and someone opened one of their eyes, while the other two of the group laughed amongst themselves, making fun of the red-haired male. But Kariya seemed to be especially affected by the words, letting out an intimidating aura of his own, towering over Yuma with a glare. While the rest of the class was affected by this ability, however, Yuma stood tall. Kariya told the male that he was just some kid who didn't know what a real adventurer was, telling Yuma to stop getting ahead of himself, to which the other men of the group tried to calm Kariya down and explained that the words were likely just nonsense, coming from a Class E small fry. With that, the tall man actually calmed down and let out a huff, checking his terminal before asking Yuma if he was fine with a month's time before he would personally test his statement on who was the strongest. This would be tested in a duel with a safety rule, explaining to Yuma that he wouldn't die even if he lost, explaining that there were a lot of guys as strong as monsters at this school, so if the red-haired male couldn't even beat Kariya, it was going to be impossible to call himself the strongest. Kariya asked Yuma if he was wrong, but the red-haired male only tightened his fist and grinned at the words, accepting the invitation. Kaoru and the rest of Class E were surprised by the fact that Yuma accepted this so easily, and without any hesitation, while Kariya felt a vein pop on his face in anger, proceeding to walk away in a large stride, saying he would remember these words. His last words telling Yuma that he hoped he would be ready to lose an arm. The tall male left as Yuma paused for a moment, leaving the class in silence until they started shouting collectively in awe and excitement. They called the boy incredible, which shocked him by their behavior, walking up to him to continue the compliments. Kaoru sat there in silence as she still processed what happened, hearing the other classmates cheer the boy on or thank him for saving them. Someone noble like Yuma was the type of adventurer that Kaoru wanted to be, and the reason why she enrolled at this school was because she admired these kinds of things. However, at the same time, she was also enrolled here to stay away from a certain man. That man being her fiancé, Narumi Sota. In the past, Kaoru could remember when she was walking up the stairs toward the direction of her school, walking along with Sota. She held at the skirt on her body, feeling as though there was someone gazing toward that part, as she asked the boy why he was walking that far away from her, and the dark-haired male apologized and explained that he couldn't go any faster. The girl felt as though their relationship was better when they were kids, remembering him as a bit of a coward but seeing him as a lot more honest than he was, and that he would always give her a gentle smile. When she was picked on by the boys, Sota would even intervene and try to protect her, but now he was just a shadow of his former self, and getting away from him became Kaoru's motivation to take the entrance exam. When she received the letter of acceptance from the adventurer's school, Kaoru stared at the paper and collapsed to the ground in shock, blushing with a soft smile to herself until she later got a call from Sota and heard that he was also accepted. The boy told Kaoru that he was looking forward to the next 3 years with her, and she hesitantly praised him for the achievement, but she couldn't believe that he had chased her and entered the school as well. Sota's family ran a standard general store, and his parents and little sister often worried about Kaoru, so Sota likely didn't do anything illegal, which made the girl see Sota in a new light again. Later, during a time when Kaoru had won a nationwide tournament with her sword skills, she was asked by Sota's parents to teach the boy sword skills, to which the girl accepted with a sweat drop. Sota himself would sometimes ask for the training, and this was something Kaoru now couldn't refuse, since Sota's parents had always been good to her since she was little, and she thought of this as a reward for the boy passing the entrance exam. As they started to run together, she wondered how much effort that this lazy boy put in, which impressed her. It all seemed to be good until they truly started training, which meant having to make sacrifices and changes to one's life. But Sota wouldn't limit his food or wake up early. Even if he did wake up and start running with Kaoru, the boy would get tired quickly and immediately ask the girl if they could stop training, since they would get stamina from leveling up anyway. She tried to explain to him that it was going to be more difficult to level up from level 4 onwards, but he interrupted her, saying that he could do more training once he leveled up. Her eyes narrowed at the sound of these words, hearing him groan in frustration and exhaustion, telling Kaoru that he worked hard to get into that school, and wondered why he had to go through more effort. Kaoru believed that it was amazing to get into adventurer's school, but if Sota tried to argue against upperclassmen like this, the school wouldn't take it lightly. She knew that Sota must be thinking that she would apologize and say that she would match his pace, but it has always been like this. The girl believed that Sota became like this because of her to some extent, but she should change the way she thought. If that's the case, then she was going to start distancing herself from him, proceeding to tell him that she would leave him behind as she started to run forward. The sounds of Sota's shouting could be heard, and all Kaoru could do was hold her head down with a disappointed frown, believing she couldn't do anything to fix the boy. Back to the present day, Kaoru stood up from her seat and glanced back in the direction of where Yuma stood, thinking about how she wished Sota had some guts like the red-haired male did. Our protagonist just sat at his desk and looked through his papers in silence, until someone interrupted his piece, that person being Kaoru, who looked down at him with furrowed eyebrows in confusion, as she asked what was up with him that day. He didn't know how to respond because he thought that she hated him, to which the girl crossed her arms and became even more confused, as she asked why he wouldn't say anything. Sota started to stutter, thinking up something to say, as he told Kaoru a lie about how he remembered something that he needed to do that day. The girl hummed and thawed at the apology and excuse, turning her body to walk away while reluctantly accepting that. It had been 2 weeks since the training started, and Sota had shown no signs of doing it. Since Sota himself didn't seem motivated at all, she thought it was about time that they stopped the training, since she felt as though she was only continuing it because she had promised his parents. Kaoru thought it was pointless, since all the love she had for him was completely gone anyway, the priority on her mind being that she needed to level up as fast as possible. She didn't have any free time to hang out with Sota, and in order to change her life for the better, She needed to solve her biggest and most difficult problem as soon as possible. The reason she and Sota were fiancés was because of a written magical marriage contract, and as long as that existed, she couldn't shake off this fact. Kaoru believed that he would lust for her body sooner or later, and could even order her to do indecent things. So before that happened, she needed to void the marriage contract as soon as possible. Glancing over at the red-haired male, it was time for things to progress in the story, and Sota found himself with his classmates and others in a dungeon. Sometime after the adventurer school, as a player, one would get to visit the heroine, Hayase Kaoru's house. As Sota was heading there, he had ended up stumbling at the general store, seeing as though things were normal in that place, but he wondered if he could really enter. The dark-haired boy felt reluctant to enter a house he didn't even know, even if it was technically his own home. But his thoughts were interrupted by the feeling of someone tapping at his shoulder, that person being his mother, who was surprised to already see him home. The male was surprised to see such a person along with his little sister, who was excited to see the boy, greeting him happily, and the wholesome sight made Sota start to tear up. He went up to his room and knew there would be no mistaking the fact that it was Narumi Sota's room. At least, it should be, thinking about how filthy it was. He got this weird, nostalgic feeling from his room and family, but he pinned the reason on the work of Butao's mind. In other words, reminiscent of the two heroines' visuals, these two were Butao's family. This was information that wasn't in the game that he played, and this world was filling in the missing information, but the dark-haired male felt as though this could be bad. The advantage of him being a player seemed to be great, but there was now a chance of it all being completely useless, so he wanted to hurry and dive into a dungeon so he could test something. As he walked through the room, he was hit with another feeling, making him turn toward the clutter of garbage and things scattered across the ground. It felt too overwhelming and disgusting to just leave around, so Sota believed that his first priority was just to clean up for now, proceeding to find a vacuum while starting the chore. It felt weird since he didn't have any trouble with finding things and vaguely knew where everything was, making Butao's memories not be so much of a nuisance. It was possible that he could one day freely remember things as he wished, since he was also concerned with Kaoru's invitation earlier. Nevertheless, Sota found something when he was cleaning, and realized it was a magical contract for him and Kaoru, but it looked more like a kid's scribbles. He tried to focus on Butao's memories, hoping it could give him some sort of context, before he saw a flash of Sota writing the contract with Kaoru sitting next to the boy. It only happened for a split second, but he was glad to have felt the feeling, seeing as though this contract was important to him. Now that he was done with cleaning, he believed it was time to go to the dungeons, grabbing a tracksuit and a bat for him to fight with. He entered the buildings and told the clerk that he wanted to sign up, but it seemed as though the lady took one look at him and didn't seem to be content with his appearance. However, she still allowed it and asked if he had identification. Once she saw the wristband, the lady immediately knew he was from the adventurer school, changing her attitude and being more respectful. Sota was sure that the clerk was looking at him in disappointment and disbelief that a guy like him was going to the dungeon, but he was going to dismiss the thought as he continued towards the dungeons. Sota glanced around and inspected the area, waiting in line before he would eventually make his way to the large black void that he would walk through, eventually finding himself passing through and entering the dungeon. It was interesting to see what it felt like to pass through the barrier between the world and the dungeon, but it almost seemed like a tourist area where he stood, so he wanted to go deeper. Sota progressed quite a bit, and felt as though he found a place where there were fewer people after coming so far, but he was interrupted by the feeling of something forming behind him. The thing that formed was a slime, which should be an easy monster, making Sota smile at the sight of it, as he prepared his bat and immediately swung at the creature. It exploded and a crystal flew out, bouncing on the ground as Sota tried to catch his breath while smiling. He sat down on the ground and was happy to experience his first real dungeon, and his first dungeon subjugation, blushing in awe when this really confirmed he was in fact in the world of Dunx. Even so, the rate in the early levels was bad, but there was also something he wanted to test out. Everything seemed a bit familiar to him, as if he were looking at a map, but he eventually found the slime room that he recognized. In this room, slimes could merge together and grow, so this was a great place to grind. When he found a slime, it was scared by Sota's presence, and the fact that the boy swung at it even if it was an intentional miss. With that, Sota tried to run away in order to lure it, but that was what Sota wanted, seeing other slimes starting to combine with that one and becoming a bigger and stronger force. The dark-haired male ran forward and swung his bat again, destroying the slime monster with ease. As a Dunx player, he was going to let himself follow his instinct, thinking as though he could get through anything if he just kept swinging his bat. Finally, he looked above and saw his level increase to 2, causing the male to take a break and sit back down on the rocky ground with relief. He was glad to have finally leveled up, but he felt a sudden feeling coursing through his body, making Sota bewildered as he realized that was the feeling of raising his stats, which he thought he might get addicted to. Sota didn't want to brag, but he didn't feel the need to feel inferior in class anymore. But everything still felt weird to him. At the early stages, all players would use this slime room as hunting grounds, since it was easy to grind for levels, but it was so empty, which confused Sota greatly. Either way, he decided to not care about that for now, since he was able to enter there and it didn't seem as though this place was off limits, so it was perfect for experimenting. He started to stretch his body, and thought about how the concept of skills also existed in Dunx, but the basic thing about them was the fact that a person couldn't use their skills if they didn't raise their levels. However, there were 3 exceptions. The first was one used by the guys from Class D, Aura. The second was the power to produce a light source, Torch, and the last one was a small healing skill. Sota knew that he could only currently use those 3 skills, but he would usually use them by hitting a shortcut key or activating by moving his body, which were manual activations. There was little difference between the game and this world, and after trying out the manual activation of all these skills, it went surprisingly well. There was also something else that Sota wanted to try, thinking that it would be fine, so he glanced around the area to make sure no one was watching him. With that, the boy grabbed his bat and held it high in the air before calling out a phrase, Void/shock. Silence filled the air, and it seemed as though nothing happened, which the boy expected, as he hadn't learned the skill. But what surprised him was the fact that a glowing light formed around his back, and a beam of light shot forward, bewildering him, while his body would be sent back a few feet from the force. Everyone in the other classes continued their own treks and journeys through the dungeon, and the long, dark-haired male that barged into Class E from earlier had seemingly been diving into dungeons ever since the first year of middle school at the age of 12. Even though his environment prepared him and the others for it, people are still risking their lives diving into these dungeons, and this man had seemingly only achieved the title of the second lowest in Class D, but he still tried to push forward with his egotistical attitude, thinking that there was nothing to be sad about as there was always Class E who was seemingly lower than him. A bunch of paramedics frantically ran past the male with a stretcher that held Sota's unconscious body on it, and the dark-haired male slowly opened his eyes and sat up on the bed, asking where he was. The nurse told him that he was in the guild's medical office, and explained that he had run out of magical power and was found unconscious around some slimes, causing him to blush and try to dismiss the story, and say that he had just gotten lost and tired, which led to such a situation. Sota had found himself awake the next day after entering the dungeon, and started to walk home in the evening while thinking about the previous day, knowing that he didn't want to tell the nurse the truth, along with the fact that he had activated a skill that he hadn't learned, which he thought would have made him look crazy in the head. As he continued his trek back home, Sota remembered that he currently had 4 debuffs: his body, being hated by one of the major characters in the original story, Butao's occasional memories coming back, and his low stats. But it seemed as though this world was trying to add a 5th debuff. When he returned, his family was quick to present dinner to him, making Sota realize just what happened to get that body of his to that weight. The boy apologized to his family and asked if they could start lowering his portions from now on, making them confused, since his mom said that she made his favorite, which made her ask what was the matter. Sota tried to explain that he wanted to go on a diet and have his food be more vegetable-focused, surprising his little sister, which made him sweat drop at the question. The boy said that ever since he entered adventurer school, he had to become more aware of his weight, and his father admitted that he did seem to be a bit chubby, but his sister tried to say he was perfect the way he was. After 1 month from that day, it was going to be the day of Karia and Yuma's duel, and the entirety of Class E was likely trembling in fear about this. Even if they were to pass the Karia event according to the story, everyone was still going to be preparing for a world-scale war, so Sota wanted to start preparing for all of that as well. He needed to level up so he could gather more information about this world, and the things that had been happening to him, such as his mysterious transport, becoming Butao, and any and all information he could get. In order to do that, this family was going to be a bit troublesome in his eyes, making him start to take notes about everything late in the night. Sota currently had no clue about how or why he was transported to this world, but the first thing he wanted to understand was why he was able to achieve an unlearned skill the previous day, since that shouldn't be possible. Being able to do something that he originally couldn't was a good thing, but he wondered if other people could do such things, and if he perhaps was the only one in the world. This could cause the story to be thrown into chaos, and if the story went against the one he knew, it was also going to be a problem for Sota. But his next priority was skill training, so he was going to head to the guild again, even if things seemed to be piling up. The next day, Sota was stopped by his mother if he was really fine to go that day with what happened yesterday, to which he tried to reassure her, until his little sister ran in and tried to ask to come with the boy, until the door was slammed on her promptly. He walked to the guild and bumped into someone, apologizing to them, until Sota realized it was the long-haired bully from earlier. This made Sota feel exhausted, since he didn't want to get too involved, but he was confused when the bully asked about the person behind Sota, making the dark-haired boy turn to see his little sister. The girl told the bully to apologize when bumping into someone, making the male glare. Sota told her to stop that, but he was quickly interrupted by the bully walking off with annoyance, and telling Sota to give his best for his class. The siblings took a breath of relief before arguing with each other about whether or not she should be there, making Sota feel how more bothersome things are becoming since he didn't want to show his skills to her, since he believed it would make her desires increase. With that, the boy said they could register together, but explained to her that those her age couldn't enter the dungeon. She seemed to be in thought and suddenly ran off with a wave, so now it was time for Sota to go back to his plans at the library. The reason why he came here was mainly to search for why his skill activated, since the ways to cast a spell were by auto-casting by shortcut keys, or manual casting like he did last time. First, he was going to learn about auto-casting, opening a book and learning that it was a simple matter of praying. Continuing with the next topic, there seemed to be absolutely no information about manual casting. It seemed that using skills not already learned wasn't the default in the world, so Sota believed that he was the only one in the world to be able to do this at that moment, making him wonder if he could switch places with Yuma, but he felt he couldn't do that. Sota didn't understand anything about this world, but he was able to notice that there were more students from his school at the library than normal, his thoughts being interrupted by the bully once again walking up to him. The male looked at the books in front of Sota, and assumed that he didn't already know how to cast his skills, saying that learning this would make him finally defeat a slime, but those very words confused Sota greatly. Outside of the guild, it seemed as though Sota's sister was squatting on the ground until she overheard students talking about how Sota was supposedly defeated by a slime, and were confused about how he got into the school in the first place, making the girl walk up to ask more about the story. Back at the library, Sota asked what the bully was talking about, until the male explained that it had apparently been known to everyone that Sota was carried away from a floor that only had slimes. The boy started to feel the life drain out of him when he heard that was what it looked like, but the male interrupted his thoughts and asked if he needed protection. However, Sota knew that this just meant they needed someone to carry their stuff. In the end, it seemed that there were only a few gophers in Class D, so Sota tried to politely reject the offer, but this only caused the bully to try and use the aura ability. It seemed that it was only affecting him, but he couldn't win against this guy in the current state he was in, making the bully tell Sota that he was just a small fry from Class E, who wouldn't say no to their request since he was the weakest guy in the room and was nothing at this school. The dark-haired boy felt himself sinking deeper with each word, since he felt as though they were correct, agreeing that he was in fact nothing. The skill that he was so proud of in his head-mounted display were all none, and there was no place for him in this school, and they even wished for him to be gone, so it wouldn't be long until he disappeared from class. People started to gather around when they heard what the bully said, laughing and making fun of Sota, since this was just that kind of world, which he knew more than anyone else. Sota started to tear up and chuckle to himself, but the bully tried to shout at everyone to look at his crying form. But that was when his little sister ran up and told the bully to stay away from her brother. That was when Sota's eyes widened, being reminded of something that he could cling to in this world, a place for him. The little girl started to tremble in her small form, her fist on the chest of the bully, which made him pause with surprise before the girl tried to grab Sota and walk off. Sota could feel his sister shaking, but the moment was interrupted by the upperclassman pulling the little girl toward his face by the collar of her shirt, glaring at her while asking if she thought she could leave just like that. A vein of anger popped, and he explained that he and Sota were in the middle of something, but the boy's little sister stood her ground, despite the anxiety that was likely coursing through her body. Sota tried to get his sister to apologize, seeing his upperclassman use the aura ability on both siblings, but Sota's little sister still stood her ground despite the tears forming in her eyes. The bully kept getting angrier and raised his fist, about to punch the girl, which Sota noticed. He started to frantically apologize, and said that he was going to get his sister to apologize too, shouting at the girl and seeing more tears fall down her face. In that moment, it was as if something struck within the boy, and he felt his body move forward on its own, dashing forward at the bully, ramming his body into the stomach of the upperclassman. The dark-haired boy realized what had happened and started to freak out, chanting in his head about how worried he was since he knew his actions were not his own. They were from Butao's feelings. The bully scoffed at the situation, and felt angry that both of the siblings were trying to oppose him, proceeding to grab Sota by his tie, which made the boy squeak in surprise and fear. People in the background continued to whisper amongst themselves, but Sota was starting to think for himself again when he remembered the moment that his sister walked in to protect him. Even if it was partly out of Butao's feelings, his next action was still out of free will, gripping onto the bully's arm and attempting to cast aura himself, telling the other male to let go of him, while insulting him about his weight. Unfortunately, the spell was not cast, and the bully was about to proceed with likely punching Sota, until someone interrupted and split the two males apart, telling them they had both done enough. The woman in armor asked if she could fight in Sota's stead, making the two of them confused and standing in silence, until Sota realized he recognized the person. The bully sweat dropped and asked the woman why she wanted to do so, calling out her rank and class, which were both high in status, referring to her as Tenma Akira. The armored woman hummed and thought and said that she couldn't tell the details of why she wanted to do that, but she did explain that she wanted everyone to get along, because both of them were her colleagues. With that, she excitedly asked if the two of them could do so, making the bully stay silent. Sota turned toward the other male and saw him standing there with a reluctant face and glare, deciding to agree even when it was obvious that he didn't want to, telling Sota that he was going to remember this moment before walking away intimidatingly. Akira let out a sigh of relief at how scary the situation seemed, but Sota was more focused on remembering the character of who this woman was. As someone strong who ranks second in her grade, she was a beautiful girl who wore full metal due to the supposedly fat and ugly body of hers that she was cursed with. She turned towards Sota and brought him out of his thoughts, surprising him until the woman seemed to give a thumbs up to the boy, telling him he did a good job of hanging in there, along with his little sister. With that, the girl promptly ran off, and was going to apparently shake off the people from her own family, leaving Sota alone to collapse to his knees from all the stress. He was suddenly tackled by his little sister, who was crying loudly, thanking him for standing up for her when she did the same, but he wanted to thank her as well, until he realized everyone in the library was staring at them. Due to how awkward that seemed to be, he thought it would be better for them to go somewhere else, to which his little sister agreed. The sun shone through the clouds of the day and the two went outside the guild, sitting on a nearby bench while talking with each other. Sota was confused about the fact that the girl had returned so fast, after he told her that she should go try registering into the guild if she wanted to go dungeon exploring so badly. But his little sister was simple in her response, just saying she didn't want to go to the guild in the first place. The dark-haired boy was struck with confusion, while the girl explained that she knew from the start that middle schoolers weren't allowed inside the dungeon, but she wanted to do so in the first place because she wanted to be an adventurer as well, proceeding to punch at the air to emphasize her desire. Sota stared at the girl with surprise and paused for a moment, before getting confused at the fact that she was so stubborn in the first place, to which his little sister groaned in frustration and embarrassment, while admitting that she just wanted some attention, since her older brother was cold to her ever since the entrance ceremony, and even stopped calling her name. She felt even worse with the fact that she lied in the first place, apologizing to her brother, which made the boy feel something within him want to do something to turn that frown upside down. He dismissed the feeling and thought about how he knew it was Butao's feelings that made him jump in like that, knowing that the character seemed to care so much for his little sister. Sota wondered if Butao was actually a decent guy, and thought about it some more, starting to feel a little bad for borrowing his body like that. With that, he apologized to the girl, and said he was going to pay more attention to her from then on, calling her by her name Kano, also telling her to not do anything dangerous. He wondered if that was how Butao would act, and it seemed to be the right call since Kano smiled and agreed to his words, telling the boy they should go home together. Sota looked at her with an incredulous expression and told the girl to go home first, since he could enter dungeons now, and he wanted to grind his levels that day. After a while, night came, and Sota returned home with injuries once again, worrying his parents greatly as they checked in on him. He reassured that he was fine, and his mother clasped her hands together, explaining how Kano was sulking, which made him turn to the girl who seemed to be muttering to herself while seemingly depressed about the fact that she couldn't join him in the dungeon. As he tried to talk to her, the girl just shook her head until he told her that he promised that he would take her there someday. That was all it took to make Kano sprint toward him with excitement, until he told her that it would be inevitable if she was aiming for adventurer school, making the girl frown before they would eventually have dinner together. Later, at some point, Sota had found the bully from earlier and groveled at his feet, confusing him greatly. Because of a certain reason, Classy received in hospitality inside the school, and that performance not long ago was part of it, seeing as some people even quit because of it. It was all for nothing when the second rank stepped in, but the real problem was the fact that Sota rebelled in that kind of place. The boy continued to grovel, but the other male told Sota to shut up, as his voice was too loud. He didn't have any ill intent, but he wasn't going to defy, as that was the image he wanted to give. With that, the bully told Sota that they should go somewhere else, to which the boy agreed. Sota's goal wasn't to have a good isekai life. His first goal was to investigate what was going on, since his wish was to return to his previous world, and his other goal was to give someone like him a place. wanting to protect this family and maybe even repay Butao. Starting Monday, school was going to properly start, so his short-term goal was to level up, as he would be able to do more things. In all the events that come, he wanted the power to protect himself and his family, so that was why he didn't want events that weren't in the game to happen. When it was time to go back to school, it seemed as though a certain person walked up to knock on the door of the family, to which Kano let Sota know. The girl didn't describe the person or name who they were, so the dark-haired boy was confused until he walked to open the front door, being shocked when he realized it was Kaoru at the door. It seems Sota would find himself in the same party as Kaoru and Yuma, but how did he get into this position? After Kaoru walked to the boy's house, Sota would try to look through Butao's memories and realize that before entering school, it seemed that he and Kaoru exchanged a mysterious promise to go to school together, and that was what was happening at that moment. He walked a few feet behind the girl and none of them exchanged any words, which made Sota feel awkward with how the situation was, but he knew that it was Kaoru who hated this silence the most, but seemed to want to stay faithful to him. Sota wondered if Butao would be the one to actually talk more, deciding that he was going to do so, which made him try to think of a common topic, but his thoughts were interrupted by seeing the girl abruptly stop in her tracks. Without turning around, Kaoru said that she heard that he was defeated by a slime, proceeding to start walking again, while Sota would be left there to complain about the bully from earlier spreading rumors around. She stopped again and actually turned this time, apologizing, before explaining that she and Yuma had already formed a party, so she wanted to tell the boy why she couldn't join his own party, thinking that was likely what was on Sota's mind due to their previous closeness. The dark-haired boy could feel something course through his body, surprising him, but it was starting to become normal to expect, since it was Butao reacting negatively to the news. Sota remembered that Kaoru in the story would join Yuma's party early on and work together to save the world, already seeming close to the boy to call him by his first name. So our protagonist started to feel bad about Sota. As Sota walked to school, he saw that things were still progressing like the game, so he was glad that things were still convenient for him. But that was when he walked into class and heard someone groan about his presence. He turned with confusion to the class and had someone walk to him, mentioning that he heard Sota was beaten by a slime. But then everyone else started to gossip and chuckle amongst themselves about this, which started to make Sota get angry about all these insults. Kaoru was about to say something about the words until Yuma jumped in, telling everyone to not say such things, apologizing to Sota, while explaining that everyone was just nervous because of what happened on Friday, including him. The dark-haired boy glanced up at this male, remembering that the player would normally be placed inside Yuma in order to play the game through his consciousness. But it was the other way around now, so if Sota approached him carelessly, he was going to say something different from the story just like now. As he thought about being careful, the class continued to whisper amongst themselves and kept throwing insults. However, Yuma told Sota to not take them seriously. Sota remembered that he wasn't supposed to be called Butao at this point in time, wondering if it was because Yuma intervened. But this still didn't change the fact that he felt really out of place. Class started and the teacher reminded everyone that they were going to need to be in groups in order to dive into dungeons, so he was going to make everyone introduce themselves again, which Sota seemed to enjoy the idea of. For the idea of who to start with, the teacher was going to go by grades, and started with Yuma, who stood up from his chair, and explained that he was from Tokyo and used a one-handed sword. Kaoru was next in the introduction, and everyone continued down the line until Sota realized how things felt bad at that point, since he hadn't said anything that day besides, yeah. He was trying to keep a low profile in order to not hinder the story, but he needed to be more approachable to form a party, more cheerful. When it was finally Sota's time to introduce himself, he shouted his name, putting his fists over one another, starting to swing at the air to simulate swinging a bat, which he said was a weapon. The dark-haired male said that he was an aspiring priest, and raised his hand in a peace sign, holding it over his face. In that moment, Sota froze up and realized that didn't look great at all, and the classroom was silent while Kaoru would sit at her desk with her hands over her face to hide herself from the second-hand embarrassment. With that, the teacher told everyone that they would be moving to orientation, and told everyone that they would use the facilities around the guild even after they graduated. The students walked out of the classroom and started talking to each other to try to make teams already, while Sota would be left there, still in his original pose, as he felt there was no going back from that. With a tightened fist, he tried to convince himself that going solo wasn't that bad. After trying to catch up with the other students, the teacher brought them to an arena that people would use to train their spells and adjust to their strength, leading them to a medical office that would heal them from injuries if needed. The last thing that the teacher told everyone was that they should bring company when on the first few floors, even if everyone had already dove into dungeons, telling everyone to make groups of 3 to 5 people, which made Sota want to kill the teacher right there. As the teacher explained, it was for formalities. He told everyone to gather in front of the guild in an hour. walking off before the students would glance around and immediately start talking with each other, trying desperately to make teams. It seemed Sota realized he wasn't the only one who was worried, since everyone else also wanted to hurry and form a party to level up, so he was going to do his best. Sota tried to go around to different people who all either laughed at his offer, weren't interested, or had a full party. He felt disappointed that he couldn't find anyone, but it seemed as though everyone made parties based on relationships, and wouldn't want to hang out with a failure like him. Sota looked up and saw some girls talking to Yuma, thinking that he already made his party, until Sota was surprised to see him seemingly decline the offer. That was when Sota got confused as Yuma ran up to the boy with a happy wave, asking if he wanted to team up with them. The dark-haired boy almost couldn't believe the confusion and wondered if the question was a death spell or such, wanting Yuma to stop joking around, as he didn't want the story to be in shambles if he kept interacting with Yuma. The only reason he was still alive in this world was because of the knowledge, so if Yuma's actions changed in Dunx, then Sota was going to have nothing left in this world. Sota was going to politely decline, but he wondered if he had a reason to refuse, and wanted to use Kaoru as an excuse. However, Kaoru wouldn't be happy if he did that. He saw the girl glance over and knew that she was supposed to team up with Kaoru, seeing her run toward their direction, which made Sota hope that she would take Yuma away from him. But his worst nightmare happened, and it seemed as though the girl asked if she could join the party. And that was how we got to this situation. Sota walked behind the two who chatted with each other, wondering why he was in this group when Kaoru was against such an idea of doing things with him. He wondered if he could ask about Yuma's situation, and was trying to get his attention, until Kaoru gave an empty expression in his direction which simulated the want for Sota to not do anything stupid with Yuma, making the boy shut up. In reality, Butao would get jealous of Yuma and start attacking, so Kaoru was in the right to stop him. But this wasn't the real Butao. That was when Yuma spoke up himself and asked Sota if he was trying to say something, causing Sota to remember they weren't complete strangers. But he knew Kaoru was being wary, so he just simply asked why Yuma wanted to be an adventurer in the first place. The red-haired boy hummed and thought and just gave a simple answer that it was admiration, as he saw adventurers when he was a youngster on TV and such, laughing and apologizing that it wasn't a proper answer in his eyes. Sota sat there with surprise, remembering that Yuma was originally just a vessel for the players, but Yuma in this world was different. He had his own motives, still standing his ground in scary situations while also being a mere high school freshman. Sota didn't want to just support the character, but he also wanted to support Yuma as a human, speaking up and saying that what Yuma said was very admirable. Kaoru looked at Sota with bewilderment and confusion, making Sota realize that was out of character, as Yuma tried to be humble about it, but there was no going back from that as well. As they reached the second floor, the teacher told everyone they could do whatever with their party now, and to not be late for class the next day, dismissing them all for the day as Sota was about to walk off to rent a weapon, until Yuma stopped him. The red-haired male explained that he and his party were going to dive into the third floor at that point, making Yuma want to know if it was alright for Sota to join his party again. A couple of days ago at the Hayase Pavilion, Kaoru could be seen in the bath, trying to relax and let out all the stresses that had been on her mind lately. But it didn't seem to do much as she got out of the bath and promptly got dressed with a towel in her hair. She realized that she had gotten a notification, and saw the news that Sota had been supposedly defeated by a slime. So that was why Kaoru decided she wanted to go to the Narumi household. The girl rang the doorbell and saw Kano open the front door, seeing the little girl frown at the sight of Kaoru, who greeted Sota's little sister. Kaoru tried to be polite, and heard the news about Sota being hospitalized, only to be interrupted by Kano saying that Sota was fine. But Kaoru couldn't help but be worried and ask if the boy was injured, getting interrupted again by Kano, who insisted he was fine. The girl ran off and shouted at Sota to let him know that that person was here again, making Kaoru seem bewildered. But this was to be expected since Kaoru had been acting cold towards Sota since spring break, so it was natural for Kano to act in such a way. When Sota walked to the door, he was struck with confusion when he saw Kaoru at the door, watching as the girl greeted him reluctantly. She really wanted to cancel the magical marriage contract, and Kaoru felt as though it would be bad for both of them if they were soft on each other again, thinking about what would happen if she were blunt about it and told him she wanted to cancel it. But the girl felt as though being straight to him would cause Sota to be stubborn. Due to that, Kaoru remembered their promise to walk to school together, and thought that she would turn things around, telling him that they needed to go now even if he wasn't finished with breakfast. As they walked together, Kaoru would subtly glance at the boy behind her, thinking about how weird Sota had been ever since the entrance ceremony, almost as if he was acting with uncertainty. As they walked together, Kaoru would subtly glance at the boy behind her, thinking about how weirdly Sota had been acting ever since the entrance ceremony. Usually at the start of a holiday, Buta would be up in Kaoru's business and cling to the girl's presence, demanding to know why she wouldn't answer his calls, which she would respond with the excuse of studying. He would turn it around and ask if studying was more important than her childhood friend, to which the girl would cover up her chest when she realized he was staring, while saying it wasn't like that. Kaoru was surprised to see that the boy had stopped calling persistently and he wouldn't stare at her chest anymore, wondering if people changed that easily, or if the dark-haired boy was just not interested in her anymore. With that question in mind, she was going to test it by mentioning his defeat by a slime, before explaining that she and Yuma were in a party together, tightening her fist before turning around when she expected the boy to get angry. But Sota just responded with a cheer, and said that it was reassuring that she had Yuma by her side. Kaoru knew that Sota wasn't a person who could hide his feelings well, so she wondered if he really wasn't interested in her anymore, knowing that she should be happy with such a thing, but it felt weird. As they walked into class together, Sota was approached by a student who mentioned the rumors, and everyone started to gossip and insult the boy, and Kaoru would just stand there and listen to their words. But she felt as though she needed to do something since they were childhood friends. She was about to speak up until Yuma did so himself, walking up and being friendly with Sota, which surprised the girl, since she had been wanting to team up with someone like him ever since the day he stood up to Karia. But Kaoru remembered the magical contract she had with Sota, and how she had faint memories of its contents along with the penalties. As the girl was looking at the rental weapons of the guild, she was approached by Yuma, and already asked about forming a party together, making her confused, until he explained that she was the first one to raise her voice against Class D. Despite the contract, there was no penalty. It wasn't as if she hated Sota, but she believed that she could concentrate better without him there. There were two other people who joined the team with Kaoru and Yuma, and those people were Tachigi Naoto and Sanjoi Sakuranko from earlier, who would provide support ranged attacks and healing. They needed to level up and gain strength, since Yuma's battle against Karia was in 1 month, and Karia's level was likely over 10. Levels would enhance one's strength and help them choose a job. Everyone was currently jobless, so they needed to hurry and choose one with their little time. But Kaoru felt as though she could do it with these people, along with the fact that they had a secret weapon. When she joined Yuma and Sota, she wanted to join more to be with Yuma rather than Sota, walking through the dungeon while trying to make conversation with the red-haired boy. The girl tried to talk about the improvements they could make, and it seemed as though Yuma was going to answer until he suddenly changed the topic, which confused the girl, until she realized that he was likely letting Sota know about their current condition, being considerate to the boy who was supposedly defeated by a slime. Yuma turned to Sota and asked what he was trying to say just now, surprising Kaoru with the direct question, as she glanced at the dark-haired boy and hoped that he wouldn't say anything weird, to which Sota asked why Yuma wanted to be an adventurer in the first place. The red-haired boy hummed and thought and simply answered it was admiration, and Kaoru wanted to say something as well, thinking that she agreed it was her motivation too, but she knew that the truth was that her main reason was wanting to distance herself from Sota. However, saying the truth would be rude. After this first run-through of the dungeon, Yuma had teamed back up with his original party from earlier, and told everyone that there was someone that he wanted to invite to the party, asking what everyone thought, but Kaoru knew that he meant Sota. Naoto fixed the glasses that sat on his face and said he wanted to honor Yuma's decision, but he felt hesitant about welcoming the guy who was supposedly defeated by just a slime, wondering what their classmates would think of them, along with what Sota would think about such an offer. Yuma realized that Sota's thoughts were important, affirming his awareness of that fact while explaining that he would think about that after trying to invite the dark-haired boy, saying that he just wanted the others to help the boy out, since everything didn't matter as long as they could defeat Karia. If Yuma asked how Kaoru felt, she would say she hated the idea, but she didn't want to talk about her relationship with Sota, along with the fact that Sota now likely lost interest in her and was going to trust Yuma, since there was no reason for Sota to turn down the offer. However, Sota did as so and asked why Yuma wanted someone like him, causing surprise in both Kaoru and Yuma, before the red-haired boy said it was simply because Sota complimented him after driving away Class D, and the fact that Sota told Yuma that his answer was a good one. Yuma tried to continue, but Sota interrupted, and said that the first thing he needed to do was fight Karia, and not add a dead weight like him, asking if he was trying to win the teacher's approval. Sota asked again why Yuma invited him to his party, and explained that he would just be miserable and stand out, surprising Kaoru even more as she watched the boy slap away Yuma's hand, walking away. He used to be able to say those kinds of things easily, but Kaoru realized that the boy had changed, and she wondered if she was the problem instead, and if Sota meddling with Yuma was just her misunderstanding, making Kaoru believe that she might have possibly been looking down on Sota. From now on, Sota was planning to go through the dungeons all alone, since he knew that he couldn't mess with or get close to any of the main characters, since he needed the storyline to be as close to the original as possible. As he tried to train himself with a new weapon that was likely rented, Sota was blasted away by the force of an attack from another enemy, causing the dark-haired boy to collapse and roll onto the ground. But he was able to pick himself up while panting heavily, holding his staff forward with a focused look. Sota stood opposite to the monster in front of him, which had its jaw hung low, as it walked on all fours towards Sota, who charged forward with his staff. But it seemed as though the monster wanted to attack as well, which made the dark-haired boy barely able to dodge the punch before aligning his body back to the ground, using his entire body to put all of his weight and force into the swing, hitting the head of the creature with a large blow. It exploded into a puff of smoke, and Sota landed on the ground before looking above him, realizing he had increased to level 4, looking forward to witness the magic stone fall to the ground after the monster had dissipated. It was 1 week after the boy had transported to the world of Dunx, and he was now level 4, deciding to dive solo in the end since it was better if he would try to stay away from the main objectives. It was a good place to stop, but since he was level 4, Sota wanted to try and go down to the 5th floor to see how much further he could get on his own. As he started to walk down the long, spiraling flight of stairs that led to the next floor, Sota tightened his fist in front of him, and was bewildered by the fact he was finally level 4. But he knew that things weren't going to be so easy anymore after this. He was going to the 5th floor, since reaching level 4 meant that increasing one's level would become drastically harder, and because of that, this became the bare minimum to become a professional adventurer with a job. But that was just the setting. Following that setting in Dunx, there were several gimmicks prepared, and as Sota walked to his next destination, he was going to prepare for one of them, which involved a bridge. He stared down to the bottom of the pit and knew that anything would die if they fell off. But he needed this bridge and pit since he was going to set up a trap to gain more levels. First, one would go across the bridge and gain the orc's hatred. Hatred being a monster's hostility toward a person, and you would wait for the orc to use his war cry skill, causing its friends to come after you. After that, you should be careful to not let them catch you. Then, cross the bridge and cut the rope, causing the bridge to collapse. The fall damage that the orcs would receive would count as a person defeating them, so this was a technique one could use to get a huge amount of experience. Sota opened up his status window to check on his level and stats before deciding that he wouldn't do the trick that day as it was getting late, and he would just check on the bridge for now, knowing that he would be looking forward to the next day. He realized that there was another bridge as he walked down the halls of the dungeon, and thought about how excellent this gimmick was, knowing that it was what he was going to be mainly aiming for now. But that was when he noticed something in the distance and ran toward that certain thing. Sota stood there while staring at the pillar, which had a symbol on it, something that Sota knew was a gate. If it was like the game, then it should connect with the location of the adventurer's school, and if he used it, he could add 4 hours of hunting for each trip. As a student, Sota should be grateful for this, but he felt weird, since he glanced around his surroundings and realized he didn't see anyone else using this gate. It wasn't also just at this area on floor 5, but it was also the same for the slime room on floor 1, where he didn't see anyone else. The same went for the best hunting places on floors 2 and 3, and all of these places were completely empty. These places could be really helpful for players like him, but he decided that he was just going to focus on trying to test out the gate, activating it like he usually would in the game. With that, Sota raised his hand and placed it on the pillar, thinking about just using auto-casting, which made him feel as though a gust of wind blew past him. A grid appeared around the room, and the dark-haired male glanced around the room he was in, knowing that he'd activated it, before he finally decided to use the pillar. Focusing his energy on the hand that was on the pillar while feeling the energy of the pillar itself starting to radiate off of it. The boy looked up and saw that the area started to change around him, until eventually it landed him in an empty area with windows and chalkboard. It seemed to be an unused classroom, and Sota left the room to see the stone walls of the hallways, walking up the stairs and finding himself in an area that felt familiar to him, as the coordinates that he was sent to were the same as in the game, the basement of the adventurer's school. Since it was a day off, there were a few people there, so Sota planned to go home before anyone would notice him. But unfortunately, things had to go differently, as the teacher of his class walked up behind him and asked what he was doing there. When Sota realized that the teacher had caught him there, he froze in place and slowly turned around to face the taller male, as he asked him what he was doing there at this time and on a day off. Sota repeated the question in his head and wondered if the teacher was unaware of the gate, confused as to why he was asking such a question while seeing the suspicious glare in his eyes. The dark-haired boy thought it could also be a question due to the teacher's doubt that someone like Sota could go to floor 5, but the boy still tried to feign ignorance and put up a sheepish expression, saying that he had supposedly remembered that he forgot something on Friday, and was thinking of getting it on his way home from the dungeon, but that he had lost track of time. Sota paused for a moment and hoped the lie worked. sweat dropping until the teacher hummed at the answer and turned around, telling the boy to be more careful. With that response, Sota was able to confirm that the gate was really unknown to the public, because if it was, Murai wouldn't have asked what he was doing there. There was also a chance that the teacher knew about the gates and just turned a blind eye, but at the very least, he was going to assume that everyone knew about the gates in order to make him seem less suspicious in the future. It was a shame, but he was going to have to use the regular route for the next day. That very next day, Sota made his way down to the bridge he found earlier, and was excited to finally be able to use the bridge trap on all of the orcs, grinding for some experience points and increasing his levels. The dark-haired boy lightly stomped on the edge of the bridge, testing the strength of it, making sure he wouldn't plunge to his death, slowly walking across the bridge before making his way back to pick up his weapon and returning to the other side. Sota wiped the sweat off his forehead, and internally let out a sigh of relief that the bridge didn't break. But now the real part of the plan began. Turning around the corner while thinking about how orcs were sluggish but had high attack power, so he needed to be careful. However, when Sota turned the corner to where it would eventually lead to the orcs, he found a male hunched over on the ground, clutching at his stomach while groaning. That man weakly asked for help, and Sota ran up to ask if he was alright. However, the man in glasses cared more about the state of his friend, reaching out to clutch onto Sota's clothes as he begged him for help. With that, Sota looked ahead of the man and saw another person collapsed on the ground, but he could also see the horde of orcs who were all crowding around what was likely now the corpse of one of their party members. He stared with shock and was almost frozen in place, feeling his body shake from the horrific scene, until he felt himself charge forward and attempt to hit at one of the orcs. When he slammed the weapon down on the backs of the orcs, he immediately turned around, hoping that luring them would make a difference in the situation, telling the male with glasses to bear with him for a moment as he was picked up in Sota's arms and run off with. The horde of orcs started to chase after Sota, who had tears in his eyes from the stress of the situation, hearing them roar loudly as he ran to the start of the wooden bridge, placing the man with glasses on the ground as the orcs ran outside the entrance of their nest. With that, Sota started to run across the bridge with the horde only focused on him, to which Sota reached the other side and tossed his staff to the side, before desperately taking out a dagger to slice at the rope of one of the sides of the bridge. The orcs kept running wildly toward his direction, which made him worried, as he finally sliced through it, about to slice through the rope of the other side. But that was when Sota saw how close the orcs were, and how they were only inches away from his face, which meant he had no time left. Suddenly the bridge collapsed, and the orcs started to fall down into the pit with a roar, falling into the void of wherever that pit ended, eventually leading to their deaths. Sota collapsed to the ground with a sweat, and realized that the man with glasses had pulled out his own knife and sliced at the rope at the other end despite a broken limb and exhausted body. After a while, the paramedics came to rescue the man in glasses and remnants of his party, but he asked the paramedics if Sota was still there as he wanted to thank him for saving him. But it seemed as though he had already left, even though the paramedics wanted to hear some statements from him as well. When Sota finally ran home with a heavy breath, he later checked on the guild to confirm that all 6 of the party members were injured, while 2 of the 6 were confirmed dead. People had died, and Sota had to witness it, even if it wasn't his fault, but it was starting to make him wonder what was going on, since he was the only one who enjoyed this world, thinking about everything that had been going on that day and what he could have done better. However, that was when Kano walked up and asked if he was okay. He tried to reassure her that he was doing fine, the 2 sitting at the dinner table while Sota kept thinking about the bodies of those people, before asking his little sister if she would come with him if he told her to come with him into the dungeon, even if it was against the law. As the 2 sat in the kitchen and Sota asked such a question, Kano couldn't help but stare in confusion at the fact that Sota wanted to hear her thoughts about joining him to the dungeons despite the law. The boy wanted to know how she felt about a back door he knew into the dungeon, knowing that she had always wanted to go in, especially to fight alongside Sota, but she knew that Sota would get in trouble if they broke the rules and dove in despite her being underaged. That was when the dark-haired male explained that he would only get in trouble if they got caught, so since Kano was aiming to get into his school, he didn't think it was a bad thing to get stronger beforehand. He started to explain about a skill called Fake, a skill that would give one's opponent false information. So if she was going to dive in at the age that she's at now, she must learn that skill. The little girl wondered why he was going that far for her when he was originally against the idea in the first place. But this was a reasonable response coming from Kano, so he asked her if she remembered what happened in the library the previous week, when she stood up for him against his upperclassman bully. The male explained that each year, students from the outside were treated like that, and others would even act violently. So at a time like that, Sota wanted Kano to be able to defend herself, tightening his fist in front of him as emphasis, before he saw his little sister nod her head in affirmation. With that, the girl smiled despite her worries, and decided that she would agree with going. But Sota could see the excitement in her eyes and let out a sigh, feeling glad that the girl was happy even though half of what he said was a lie. As the story progresses in this world, there would be a route where a large number of characters would die, and of the characters who die, this did include the Narumi family, as they were nothing more than mob characters in the video game. This was why leveling up was a must, and people in this world needed to be relatively strong as well. So Sota, knowing what would happen in the story, was extremely important knowledge, but telling others such things carried risks. The male thought back on the memory of 2 of the members of that man's party being beaten relentlessly and eaten to death, but he knew that he couldn't be reluctant to bring his sister to the dungeon, as he wanted to protect the people dear to him, even if this was technically the family of a man whose body he was inhabiting. 1 week later, they were walking through the forest together, and Sota glanced back at the girl who asked if they were there yet, to which Sota asked if he told her they were going through the mountain, making Kano shake her head while denying such. The only reason why they were taking this route was because there were a couple of students who would be able to identify Kano, so he wanted to make sure she didn't get in trouble, glancing back and wondering if telling her about a certain thing would be okay. They reached the basement together, and entered the unused classroom before Sota would hold his hand over the chalkboard, activating the symbol to send him into the dungeon, letting them fight a few orcs on the way to the bridge. He explained the plan to her and told her to not chicken out, to which she seemed confident and nonchalant, while saying that it would be fine as she only had one job. With that, he walked across the bridge and thought about what happened the past week. The 2 of them had tried various things to make sure everything would go well at this moment, and his little sister ended up going with a machete while he chose scissors for the rope. Kano was casually sitting in wait only to start screaming with tears in her eyes at the sight of the horde while he told her to cut it, which she quickly got up for. She raised the machete and Sota was able to cut his side, but when Kano tried to do her side, it didn't work, and she froze up when she saw the orcs getting closer. Her brother charged forward and was able to cut the other side in time while being grazed on his arm before the orcs fell to their deaths. Kano apologized about his arm, but he reassured her that he was fine, as he was wearing a jacket made out of a demon wolf's pelt, so he apologized as well since it was her first time in such a scary situation. The girl grunted and squirmed when she felt a sudden feeling through her body, as Sota explained that was the symptoms of leveling up, and the girl felt as though she had gone through 5 levels, surprising the boy before he heard her mention something about a job change, which caused him to stop her right there. Sota explained that their starting class, newbie, actually had more to it than one would think, and that training hard enough could make people expand their levels by 3. However, one could only feel the difference later. The 2 sat there after Sota finished rambling about the system, as he realized he had spoken too much, since Kano would ask about any of the words he said since she wasn't aware of such things yet. Meanwhile, Yuma and his team had all finally reached level 5, and were able to change their jobs to the ones they were aspiring to be, with Kaoru as fighter and Yuma as thief, seeming happy in the moment, but their happiness could only last so long, as it was only 1 week until the match with Kariya. The day comes closer and closer to the time when Yuma and Kariya are to fight, to which the upperclassman male checks out the site of the arena during his days off. Meanwhile, Sota was taking a break with his sister in the dungeon, and Kano told her brother a warning to not tell anyone about the bridge trap, explaining that it would be a shame if other people started using this hunting spot, or if a bunch of scary guys supposedly came looking for information with threats. The dark-haired male sweat-dropped at the words and nodded, agreeing before tightening his fist as he paused for a moment. He glanced down at the ground and wondered if his reasoning for knowing such a place bothered her, making Kano hum in thought before affirming so, even if it was a bit unsure. So Sota just said he only found the area by chance. This was, of course, a lie, since Sota was the one who specifically sought out this place in order to grind for levels, but he couldn't help but be surprised by how much trust this girl had in Butao, making him feel odd about the whole situation. The boy thought back on everything that had happened, and how being enrolled in the adventurous school was amazing, but he acted cowardly back in the library. It was almost like Kano had this priority about things and then would replace them, making Sota feel as though something was off, and that it felt too frank to be an act. So he wondered if he could really trust his little sister. Meanwhile, in another part of the dungeon, Kaoru and the others were training, when Yuma was overpowering her attacks. The red-haired male charged forward with his blade, slashing at her, while she would collapse to the ground, the 2 of them panting heavily before Yuma would speak up and outstretch a hand toward Kaoru, saying that he was starting to get the feel for the sword fights. She gently placed her hand in his and was helped up, as Yuma told her that his increase in skill was all thanks to her, but she glanced away timidly and felt humble about it, downplaying his compliments, while explaining that she was just supposedly copying Kariya's battle record. He told her that he was grateful for her doing that, but Kaoru still couldn't help but feel anxious about this all, the grip on the handle of her blade tightening as she put a hand to her chest, and glanced up at the red-haired boy, asking Yuma if he thought he could win against Kariya. Yuma sweat-dropped and his expression turned into a conflicted one, filled with a little doubt and anxiety, saying that he wasn't going to lie about his answer, and responding he didn't really know if he could. With that answer, Kaoru stood there in silence, and the others jumped into the conversation, explaining that if Yuma felt as though his winning chances were low, withdrawing was an option, but Yuma interrupted everyone, insisting he couldn't withdraw. Even before the duel, Class E was considered lower than everyone in both level and experience compared to Class D, so this was Yuma's chance to overthrow the male on a whim. If he withdrew from the fight, then nothing was going to change, and the red-haired boy felt as though this would also give the upperclassmen a reason to call them cowards. However, this was also the reason Yuma didn't want to lose. Hopefully this would go well, considering Kariya, the man himself mentioned, was still training on his own, and was seen punching at multiple punching bags and tearing them into pieces while he was only just breaking a sweat. Sota and Kano went with each other to a shop after they had gotten a lot of money from all their dungeon hunting, and he had used a lot of the money to buy some boots for his little sister, in order to make sure that she would be a little more safe in the future. Everyone was doing their own thing as well as the days went by. The long, dark-haired bully from Class D was going through the dungeon with his own party and leveling up as much as they could, while Yuma and his team were all doing their own individual ways of training themselves. Kaoru choosing to just sit in the bath while stuck in thought. So many things were going on inside her head that she almost didn't hear the shout of Sota calling her name, snapping back into reality and seeing that the boy had grabbed her and stopped her before she would walk into the street, while the light was still red. She hesitated and was bewildered before apologizing, and the dark-haired boy asked how Yuma was doing, to which the girl explained that they got to level 6 in 1 month, and that Yuma's motivation was high. Even with that, this fight was still going to be hard, as this duel was called Kariya's event, and most players in the game would die the first time around. It looked like Yuma's leveling went smoothly, but people can't wing it with just the levels alone. So for Yuma's level, at least one special weapon was going to be desirable, but even then it was a struggle. Everyone gathered themselves into the arena, and Kaoru was praying to herself, since she had been stressed about the fight the whole month. But Sota seemed to have some faith in Yuma winning this fight after all, seeing the red-haired boy pull out his blade for the battle. Yuma was sweating, and he was trying not to show the worry and anxiety that filled his body and his eyes, staring forward as Kariya called out Yuma's name, and asked if the boy was ready. The red-haired male threw the sheath of his blade away and affirmed that he would always be ready, and everyone in the school could be seen on the sidelines, watching from all angles of the arena. Kaoru still had her hands clasped together, showing how stressed and worried she was about the results, before overhearing the gossip coming from the upperclassmen students. They laughed and whispered to each other about how the lower classes seemed to not know their place, and these students didn't believe they were going to win against Kariya. Another student bewildered that those in Class E tried to defy them. The girl glanced over at these students before she and her party members heard the voice of the bully from earlier, making them look at the large male who walked in with confidence. He walked straight to Sakurako, which made the pink-haired girl look worried and upset, as the male put a hand around her body, greeting her with a sickeningly sweet voice, until Naoto grabbed the bully's hand and asked if he was sure he could loaf around the areas like he was. But the upperclassman student only glared as a response, muttering under his breath, before Naoto would turn his attention to the arena since the match was about to start. Kariya said that he was ready to start as well, and the announcer confirmed the start of the match. But it seemed as though everything went so fast, as Kariya already charged forward with his blade, surprising Yuma greatly. His eyes widened, and so did Kaoru's, as the red-haired boy had to jump back to dodge, causing Kariya to grin at the fear that seemed to coat the expression of Yuma. However, Yuma still was just getting started. That swing with a great sword was one that Sota's eyes couldn't see, but he still came a long way and was now level 8. With that said, if he fought Kariya himself, Sota wondered if he would have a higher chance of winning, but he immediately answered his own question with a no, since that was just how much of a gap in experience and level that those in Class D had compared to Class E. Kaoru and the other students of the school watched closely, and the girl thought about how they were all level 6, but all of their stamina and combat prowess were all different, so there could even be level 7 people who could be weaker than her, which meant that people could turn things around despite their levels. Even so, Kariya was level 11, with the kind of physique that he already had, causing both of them not to be able to afford any openings, and for the two of them to always be cautious. But this was where the secret weapon came in. As Kariya slashed at Yuma once again, he dashed back to dodge it once more, and looked up at the tall male, asking him what was up with him, as there was no power in his attacks, which made the red-haired male ask if Kariya was scared. The two males stepped toward each other, and Kariya asked the same, and Yuma agreed, saying they were just going to wear themselves out at this rate. He grinned and gripped his blade, a blade that Sota recognized as a static sword. This was a weapon that would be able to lower an opponent's agility and have a medium chance to paralyze people. making this a bothersome weapon to obtain. The two men stood opposite each other and prepared themselves to continue the battle, to which Yuma kneeled onto the ground before charging forward, which surprised Kadia a bit, as Yuma tried to slash at the taller male. Kadia had blocked the attack with his own blade, and the two men made eye contact with each other before clashing weapons with each other once again. The people watching from above talked with each other about their thoughts of the battle, wondering what Yuma was doing, and if the red-haired male was getting impatient, calling him lame. Even if this was what the upperclassmen thought, this static sword was something that Kadia didn't know, and Kaoru noticed how wary Kadia seemed to be, not wanting to pull off big moves. Meanwhile, Sota noticed that Kadia's favorite move was to endure all the attacks and then use a huge swing, watching that very thing happen as the larger male attempted to use a big swing again. Yuma was able to predict the attack, as it all seemed to be a pattern, and the red-haired male narrowed his eyes before waiting for the opening, and trying to activate the static sword's ability, the blade starting to glow as he announced that he would be taking the next attack. Yuma activated the skill of the blade, Double Sting, plunging the tip of it into a part of Kadia's chest. Earlier, the upperclassman bully that had been harassing Class E and Sota's family lately was thrown against one of the pillars of the school, letting out a grunt of pain. He wondered why he was acted towards that way and looked up at the woman who sat in what almost seemed to be like a throne, with other students standing behind her. This woman being known as Swole Kolki. Her legs were crossed over each other, and Kolki asked if the bully already knew about the situation that he caused, driving out Class E right after enrollment and using one of her students in his harassment. On top of that, she was disappointed that he would use her students, failing to find slaves. Kolki mentioned that the classes were all ranked in order from A to E, and this ranking was absolute, talking about the duel that Kadia was going to have with Class E, and how she had used her connections to free up the arena, so she hoped that Kadia was going to lose. The dark-haired girl was about to warn about what was going to happen if Kadia lost, but she glanced over at someone who interrupted her words and grabbed at her leg. This woman spoke up and insisted that Kadia wouldn't lose, saying that even a level 7 student like her couldn't even imagine fighting against a man like Kadia, and mentioning how that male would dive into disgusting places and would work unbelievably hard. Kolki glanced down at the girl and held a cold look in her gaze, before she would spin around and kick the girl in the side of her body. At the words that the girl would mention, Kolki repeated the words back, saying that the only way one could deny that was due to the caste system that was made in this school, and she looked to Kadia for his opinion on the situation. The short-haired male just stood there without saying a word, and the girl called out Kadia's name, yet he didn't respond, as she tried to ask if he thought that he wouldn't lose. Again, he didn't respond to the question, but finally opened his mouth, asking Kolki if she thought he could win, or if she thought he lacked the effort. The girl was confused by Kadia's questions, watching the tall male bow and apologize for the trouble he had caused. Kolki said that there was no need, and that the incident in the library was something that Kadia didn't seem to know about, saying that he still worked hard even if he would lose, but he won't make excuses, and just show the results of his actions. With that, Kadia told the woman that he was going to go back to training, excusing himself until Kolki asked if he wasn't going to help the female student that was still under the foot of Kolki. Kadia explained that he had only come there to apologize as the representative of Class D, proceeding to turn around and tell Kolki to do what she liked with the girl. With that, he walked away from the classroom, while hearing the pained grunts of the female student who begged for Kolki to stop. Back to the battle, Kadia was pierced with the static sword. However, even before the battle, he had known about the abilities of the static sword. Yuma panted heavily and chuckled to himself, saying that the skills of the sword would make him able to see Kadia's every movement, but he was quickly proven wrong by Kadia immediately kicking Yuma away. The upperclassman student grinned widely, and asked what Yuma was talking about regarding his movement, seemingly putting an intimidating aura out. Because Kadia knew about the sword, he made countermeasures, and changed his armor to have stun resistance. But even so, Kadia was cautious, since he believed that Yuma still had something up his sleeve. The red-haired boy slowly got back up, and his body started to tremble from the exhaustion, as Kadia looked down at the boy, and the battle continued while the students would watch. Everyone from Class E stared with shock and disbelief, staring with horror while Kaoru would collapse to the ground, as Yuma was starting to lose. He was being held up by his face in Kadia's hand, and the upperclassman asked if the red-haired male wanted to say something or if he was surrendering. Yuma was dropped to the ground with bruises and was bleeding from his nose, shouting that he wasn't surrendering, but that only had Kadia just kick him away once again, which made Yuma fly in a direction while grunting from the pain. In that same moment, Kadia charged forward and slashed the sword into Yuma's gut, looking down at the male who still tried to choke out that he wasn't surrendering, but Sakurako had had enough, and ran forward to shield the boy from any more attacks. The pink-haired girl told Kadia to stop and not hurt him anymore, seemingly causing the tall male to stop his actions. Naoto stared with shock and disbelief as the bully chuckled and asked if he should return his words to him. The teacher left the scene of the arena, and with that, due to being unable to fight back, Yuma lost, and the winner was Kariya. Kariya let out a breath while staring down with a glare at the red-haired male who was defeated in the battle, as Kaoru and Sota stared forward with either horror, disbelief, or bewilderment. The upperclassman stood there with his fists tight, as the students from the higher classes started to cheer in excitement. Sakurako sat there next to Yuma, trying to vaguely protect the last of the consciousness he may have left, while everyone from Class E would stare in shock or disappointment. Kaoru and Naoto ran out into the main area of the arena, calling out the name of Yuma, before Kariya would shout out loud to garner the attention of everyone in Class E, asking them if they understood now which classes were stronger and were above them, and who they should obey. The male continued, and said that some of the students may go up to Class D by the time they would graduate, but he had no faith in them, and just said they were all a bunch of slaves, and that he was giving all of them an order about how the upperclassmen wanted gophers. Koki sat up at her usual chair, watching through a screen with a grin, as she leaned her face against her fist. Kariya told everyone that if they had a problem with his words and orders, he would duel with all of them any time, just like he did with Yuma. The red-haired male groaned in his half-conscious state as the students from the higher status classes laughed with each other, saying how they knew that Class E was just all talk, proceeding to start walking away from the arena while saying that Class E's spirit was the only thing good about the class, telling them that they were going to work them to the bone as gophers and to prepare themselves. As Yuma and his party started to walk away, Kaoru and Naoto holding the red-haired boy up to support his body as he walked, Yuma apologized to everyone, calling himself weak, hanging his head low with an expression of regret. The other students stared with indescribable expressions, likely some with pity, before Yuma would realize how pathetic his form looked, and he took his arms off his party members to try and seem less weak, apologizing once again, saying he would win next time. The students continued to stare in silence, while Sota glanced at everyone and started to walk off, thinking about how he was expecting to at least feel a little vexed about the situation. He was going to hold a grudge, but as he went into the empty classroom to grab his school bag in order to walk home early, the dark-haired boy knew that the disparity against the other classes was not something he could manage himself. Sota felt sorry for Yuma, but this loss wasn't something too far off from the main story. However, this isn't something that he should be thinking about now, as the real problem that was on Sota's mind was about who gave Kariya the countermeasure to Static Sword. This really confused Sota, as the Static Sword was strong and usually extremely difficult to acquire, so people who lived in this world would usually not expect such a quality item to be used by someone of low status in the school. Kariya's armor was also different from the usual one he would wear in the game, and it wasn't as if Sota didn't think about such a possibility, but now he was convinced. There were other players aside from him in this world. Everyone either walked back to their classes, went to the nursing office, or just walked about for the rest of the day, while Sota continued to think about how someone in the hundreds of students in this school had told Yuma to get the Static Sword, and how someone had told Kariya about the countermeasures to said item. There could be a chance that Sota was overthinking things, but moving forward, he was going to act under the premise that other players could exist, especially given what happened that day. According to the story, crushing Yuma would just become a demerit, no matter how one looked at it, so he couldn't read the motives of this mysterious other player. He needed to figure out the truth of why he was transported, and Donex's story was an important rail to do such a thing, as depending on the situation, there was a chance that this player could become hostile towards him. As Sota started to walk away from the school building, it seemed as though there was someone standing out there, waiting with intent, as this man with glasses glanced up when Sota walked by, which made him pause with surprise. Meanwhile, Yuma and the rest of his party were in the nursing office, and it seemed as though the red-haired male had been there long enough to be able to be almost fully healed after such a battle. The nurse explained to everyone that there was nothing serious injured both on the inside and outside, explaining to Yuma that it looked like he would be able to go back to his normal activities soon enough, which was a good thing, since it would be important to continue adventuring and leveling up despite the failure. The red-haired male glanced down with almost sadness in his eyes, speaking up to thank Kaoru, Sakurako, and Naoto for all they had done for him. The dark-haired male with glasses called for Yuma's attention and thanked him as well for fighting for their sake. But he was still disappointed since it looked like the Static Sword plan was seen through by the upper classes. But he explained the duel wasn't pointless. With that, Yuma thanked Naoto for the words and sat there in silence for a moment, while the nurse would walk away. As Yuma explained to the others, he was going to rest there in the nursing office for a bit, and that everyone could head back to class now. As the three walked away from the nursing office, Kaoru spoke up, and mentioned how it seemed as though Yuma looked better than she thought, but after a few steps of silence together, Naoto spoke up in response and told Kaoru that he was in fact not as fine as it seemed. She was confused by what he meant until Naoto explained that Yuma didn't want anyone to worry about him, and was just using the priest-teacher's words as an excuse, and how Yuma was hiding the real reason why he wanted to rest, proceeding to slam a fist against one of the nearby pillars in frustration, as Naoto explained that the red-haired boy was telling them to just leave him alone. As the sun started to set in the sky, the orange light started to reflect off the clouds, and the man in glasses who was waiting outside the gates of the school called out to Sota, which surprised him, both from the shout and the fact that Sota recognized this man. He introduced himself as Kikuchi, and asked Sota if he was the adventurer who saved him, explaining that he had come there to thank him, despite still obviously recovering as he was in an arm cast. Kikuchi told Sota that he looked pretty used to diving into dungeons due to the energy that he was giving earlier when he saved the male, and the fact that he was quick to show that he knew how to destroy all the orcs in one shot. But Kikuchi was aware that Sota was still likely a student due to how young he looked, so this was why the man in glasses assumed he was probably a student at the school. The male started to explain the situation that had happened, and how one of his party members was being hit on by some other adventurers, so he tried to intervene and defuse the situation to let everyone go on their merry way. But it seemed as though this group told Kikuchi and his party about a place to find treasures as a token of their apology. That place was, in fact, clearly a lie, given everything that happened after, as it was just the Orc Lord's nest. Kikuchi stared at the ground with a sad expression, as Sota had the memory of the horde flash in his mind. Sota apologized and felt bad he couldn't have come sooner. However, the man in glasses glanced over and mentioned he did some research beforehand about how the guild gave reminders about groups of orcs, implying that it was partly his own fault. But Sota told the male that sooner or later people would know such a thing when diving into the lower floors of the dungeons. Regardless of what Sota thought, Kikuchi wanted the boy to know that he was grateful to him, causing the dark-haired boy to pause in silence as Kikuchi grinned at him softly. That was until the man in glasses had his eyes widen in recognition, when he realized the other students who walked out of the gates, making his expression flash with horror and anger, as he yelled out at them for having the audacity to trick his party and cause 2 of his members to die. The bully that would harass Sota and the others along with his 2 party members glanced over at the direction of Sota and Kikuchi, while the long-haired male would raise an eyebrow in confusion, before recognizing Kikuchi's face, calling him a small fry and grinning while asking how the orc tasted. That caused rage to course through Kikuchi's body as he shoved past Sota, making the bully grin even more, and say that was what his party deserved. Kikuchi tried to get his hands on the other male before Sota would roughly pull him away before anything else could happen, causing him to have to back down as Sota looked up at the students laughing at the sight, insulting the male along with Sota, causing Sota to glare. The oppression from these guys and the school siding with the bullies and further persecuting Class E. It wasn't like Sota had nothing to say, but he was just not the one screaming those words that others would do the actions of. Even so, he couldn't help but still call out for Kikuchi's attention, and tell him that while he couldn't promise anything, he was going to one day take on the students from the upper class. Kikuchi was surprised by the response, since they were strong people, and that would put Sota in danger, but the dark-haired boy just reassured that he was going to train seriously, and that he was more than what he presented. The male in glasses paused for a moment before getting back up with the help of Sota, as he apologized for his behavior, and thanked Sota. But while this moment was happening, it seemed as though a certain someone was watching from afar. Hayase Kaoru. This blue-haired girl was starting to have this kind of dream lately, one where she seemed to be a pupa that was given the chance to one day become a butterfly, turning into said insect with high hopes. However, even with such a transformation, what awaited her was something different from what she imagined. The hope that she had discovered was crushed after she saw the loss that Yuma had taken, after all the lip service he had given earlier in the first weeks of class, and the guy that she used to look down on was steadily moving forward in life. She would awake in her bed, her eyes slowly opening as she sat up in her bed while thinking about the repetitive dream that had been happening lately, and what she should do next after a feeling of emptiness seemed to have been consuming her. The start of the day happened, and the sun shined down on the town. Kaoru getting dressed and prepared for the school day is normal, as she walked to Sota's house in the morning as usual as they promised as kids. As usual, despite Kaoru upholding this promise, the two would walk together at a distance, with Kaoru in the front, who walked usually without speaking a word to the dark-haired boy. As they approached the buildings that made up their school, her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Yuma walking in front of her, seemingly holding multiple bags and backpacks. The 2 bags that were in his right hand were taken from him, as Naoto chuckled at the sight, and tried to make light of the situation to cheer Yuma up, mentioning how he was working hard, which seemed to make the red-haired boy weakly smile back from the phrasing. Naoto asked if he was carrying all of these bags to Class D, to which the boy affirmed so, and that he was bringing them all the way from the dormitories after he finished cleaning their rooms. Another set of bags were taken from Yuma's left hand as Kaoru grabbed them from him, and walked forward as well, leaving Sota to have to walk by himself. As everyone was on their way to Class E, it seemed as though the bully from earlier was talking to some girls and bragging about how his older brother had been invited to a party, and that it was from a famous branch, which excited the girls and made them ask more questions about it. Naoto glanced over at the scene and felt disappointed that the situation had to happen in his own seat. Yuma called for Kaoru's attention, explaining to her that they were going to dive to floor 6 that day, and asked what she thought about the situation. She looked away with a conflicted expression, and told the red-haired boy that she was not going to join, as she wanted to train by herself a bit more, which the others respected. The blue-haired girl would find herself going for a run by herself in the forest, but even she herself knew the reason why she had stopped dungeon diving with Yuma and the others. Kaoru used to feel comfortable in that party, but it started feeling like she was being forced by something. As Kaoru and Sota walked together to school once more, she thought to herself and wondered what she should use as an excuse that day to not have to be around him. But she had a realization about something and muttered to herself out loud. The two stopped in place and Sota spoke up, asking if something had happened lately, as the girl would glance behind her while thinking about how Sota had clearly put distance between them ever since they had entered the school. But she knew that Sota was still worried about her given his question. She spoke up and mentioned how she was just surprised that Yuma lost, making Sota ask if she was disappointed, which caused the girl to get frantic since it was the truth. The girl looked down at the ground and explained how she didn't want Yuma to lose, and was disappointed since she didn't feel confident she could keep going to an adventurer school, causing Sota to stare with surprise, before remembering Yuma's face and walking past Kaoru, telling her that it was good enough if she would just do what she saw, which made her think back on all the inspiring words that Yuma used to put out. They continued to walk to school, and as Yuma tried to greet the girl when she entered the classroom, Kaoru immediately got her party's attention, and apologized for skipping the dungeon delving for days, saying that she thought about things and would continue going with them starting that day. They were pretty casual about their responses, as Yuma said that he never knew her mentality was that strong, while Sakurako called this part of Kaoru cute, and Naoto gave no comment, causing Kaoru to be confused by their nonchalant attitude, as they went back to normal with being friendly with her as Sota watched from the distance. They went back to delving into the dungeon together, and Kaoru was barely holding up against the monster, before Yuma would smash his body against it, giving Kaoru an opening. The red-haired male could have landed the finishing blow himself, but it seemed as though he was going to make her take the credit. Things that happened until now and the things that Kaoru didn't see. This process that was in her mind as she sliced the monster in half was one that she had to thank Sota about after increasing her level to 7. But the next day, Sota didn't end up coming to school. A day before the previous chapter, Sota and his little sister Kano had been slowly increasing their levels steadily, and Kano was now at level 7, which made her excited. As the girl started to jump around happily with a grin on her face, the dark-haired boy started to think about how he had understood something after diving into dungeons for a little over a month. All the good hunting places, bridge traps, and places that the players found were all uncommon knowledge in this world, compared to the world where he had come from. Sota had also asked Kikuchi about this, and there was no mistaking about the lack of knowledge about any of these things. But there was one thing that was bugging the boy, and that was about the DLC of this world. The content, scenarios, and stages that would normally be added after a game's release for free or at an additional cost. When Sota and Kano sat down together during a break, he explained to her that it was going to start getting harder to level up, so they were going to dive into the 7th floor of the dungeon, since it would now be fine with their current level. Raising up a finger as emphasis for his next words, Sota explained what would happen on that floor if his knowledge was correct, saying that the two of them should be able to get a certain job there, which Kano acknowledged. This armored knight mentioned in the quest was explained to give people the ability to create and control golems, and the DLC quest was called a Golem's Heart. The new job in general always lacked reception, since the golems were still slow, even if you could ride them, and the player would usually be weaker than the golem in battle. Regardless of that, for an average guy who couldn't log out from this game, there was no job more convenient to choose than this one. After Sota had explained all this, Kano stood up and shouted in surprise about such a skill, feeling excited, as Sota told her they would go to such an area and investigate what she was hyped about. As they walked there together, Sota thought about how they could put some change aside from their jobs, as there was a good hunting ground on that floor as well. But his sister spoke up during their trek and mentioned how she had this two-sword style skill from the start, and wondered if Sota knew anything about it. The boy froze up, remembering that starting off with a skill given to a person was very rare. But he broke out of his silence and shouted with an incredulous expression, confused as to why his sister hadn't told him earlier, and she explained that she didn't understand it. Speaking of starting skills, Sota's Glutton was one of them. but two-sword style was one he recognized, immediately remembering the entire paragraph of information about the skill inside his mind. This skill was an extra one normally acquired from the high-ranking job Samurai, and it allowed a person to equip a weapon in each hand to increase the hit rate. After all of his thoughts, Sota finally spoke up, and asked his little sister to confirm that she hadn't fought a monster head-on, to which she affirmed. With that, Sota explained they would encounter a demon wolf named a warg on their way to the location. So he wanted to leave the fight to Kano as a way to give her experience, and it seemed as though she had no hesitance when accepting the task. Sota walked through the forest and looked around until he finally stumbled upon the demon wolf, glancing back at Kano as the two of them stood next to each other, while the wolf stood its ground. He stared forward and saw the canine bare its teeth before charging forward, but Kano charged forward as well. However, the sight of the unlatched jaw made Kano feel a bit of fear, and sliding under the monster as it tried to pounce. After she landed, Kano turned around to see the demonic wolf still in its pounce, and ending up latching its sharp teeth into the tree that was in its path, completely biting through it and having it fall to the ground. The girl stayed silent, sweat dropping, while her brother watched and would wait on the sidelines ready to protect Kano when needed. The warg pounced again and tried to bite at Kano, but the girl was able to focus on her action and use both of the blades in her hands to slash at the body of the monster, effectively killing it in one blow, as blood spilled out of the warg's body before it turned to dust. Sota stared from a distance and realized how strong this skill made his sister, making him glad that Kano was on his side, making him wonder if everyone in this world was as talented as this. Suddenly, the sound of a howl was heard in the distance, and Sota recognized it as one from another warg. The road leading to this point had no struggle, but this was because of Sota's knowledge, so he had finished making preparations for countermeasures. However, he should have remembered that this world didn't have the leeway for preparations, and the worst was yet to come. After defeating the demon wolf and continuing through the forest, Sota and Kano were able to find a secret hole that the two had dropped into, and found what could be a labyrinth, with skulls and stones as the walls. The two made their way through the maze and eventually stumbled upon a stone pillar in one of the rooms, which Sota already recognized from his game knowledge and from the fact that he had already seen these gates earlier. He was glad it was there, and told Kano that they should recognize their magic power while they were at it, making the girl flush with excitement as they walked toward the pillar. Sota's goal on this floor was the Armored Knight task, but he also wanted to get the Faker, which was a skill that one would get from the Thief job. Basically, a person would raise their newbie level and get 3 extra skill slots, change their job to Thief, and acquire Faker. Then they would get the Armored Knight job and dive into the dungeon at their own pace. Kano asked if what she was doing was fine, and the dark-haired male affirmed as so, watching his little sister raise up her left hand to the stone pillar. He walked forward and told her that it looked good, explaining that their goal was just up ahead, and that they should take a quick rest where they were before that. The little girl agreed, and they did as so, before making their way through the rundown walls and finding an array of buildings that were almost castle-like, which was a thought in Kano's mind as her eyes were full of awe. Sota explained that the area was a citadel, and was a place for golems, walking forward and alongside his sister, as Sota already held out his blade in case they would run into anything. They walked forward to the entrance of the citadel and went under the gate, walking past the large golem which surprised and almost scared them, until Kano realized it wasn't attacking them or moving at all. Sota explained that wood golems wouldn't attack unless one was closer to it, but he mentioned that the crystals stabbed into its back were one of the quest items needed for the Armored Knight, as it was a jewel that could be sold for high prices. The person they would sell it to was a woman who wore very luxurious clothing, and had demonic eyes and horns with slits in her eyes. This woman being located in her shop, which was on the 10th floor. At their current level now, the two of them couldn't reach the shop, but they must go there if they wanted to sell it. Sota suddenly became surprised when Kano jumped in front of him with excitement at the mention of this shop, but he pushed her face away and said that they should walk around for now before doing anything. He let the little girl know in advance that skeletons might appear, so they shouldn't let their guard down. As they walked through a door, they indeed ran into some skeletons, as expected, but Sota slashed through them before they would even fully manifest from the air, walking past the dissipating corpses with a neutral expression on his face, as if he weren't worried about them at all. That was when Sota heard some clacking noises in the distance, but he dismissed it and explained to Kano that the castle room was just up ahead, and that there was a chance of something there, which made the girl excited at the possibility of treasure. They were going to try and check out what was going on, slowly walking up to the door and creaking open the door, leaving it slightly ajar. Inside the room was a person sitting lonesome on a throne, and it seemed to be a skeleton monster with horns and high-class looking armor, which made Sota know it was not an ordinary skeleton. If it were a rare monster, he was assuming that the skeleton was at least level 8, but Kano was too focused on something else, telling her brother to look underneath the feet of the monster. There was a small box under the throne which made the girl believe that there could be treasure inside, so she asked if he wanted to fight it. However, the dark-haired boy was slightly sweating, and he told the girl that they weren't going to attempt it as the skeleton seemed to be trouble, and that they should challenge it after defeating some golems first. But Kano couldn't help but think about the box still. They left the citadel and went back to the stone pillar to teleport back home, but they returned the next day without any delay. Sota wondered if Kaoru was okay, as she was looking quite worried, and the blue-haired girl had never made such a face in the original game, so it was highly likely that Sota's words caused the new expression to happen. He wanted to ask her about the static sword and if she knew anything about it, but Sota believed that he should wait and see for now. Kano got Sota's attention and pointed in a certain direction, making him turn his face over and his eyes widen at the sight of a campfire, meaning someone else had been there since they had left the previous day. At the sight of this bonfire, Sota stood there with a sweat drop and was wildly shocked and confused. Given the existence of this bonfire on a lower floor, including in such a secret area, that meant his assumption about the DLC area had all just been proven wrong. He glanced over at the stone pillar gate and had another thought of confusion about everything, his mind racing with answers, and wondered if these people spent the night and did not use the gate, meaning the group was likely still around the area if they didn't know how the gate worked or just chose to not use it at all. Either way, things were likely going to get more dangerous from here. During Sota's thoughts, he was brought back to reality at the sound of someone calling out to him in Kano, causing the two of them to whip their bodies around to the direction of the voice. There was a man walking up to them with a desperate expression, asking if they had any food, since he and his party members were starving. Sota held up his blade just in case, and was confused at the fact that this man had no hesitation when talking to him. The other male seemed exhausted from running over, and hunched over with his hands on his knees, as two other people walked into the area as well. But Sota still held up his guard and asked why they were there. The other man held up his hands in an attempt to show that he was peaceful, explaining that they drove a warg into a corner and were called by a companion, when they ran into a hole nearby and found a tunnel after they'd all grouped up. After all that, they ended up where they are now. The word choice in the story made it sound like they were some people who got here by accident, but it was still going to be a problem since he couldn't go back unless he shook those guys off. Once again, Sota's thoughts were interrupted by the man speaking up once again and asking about food, asking once more if Sota and Kano had some, while the other male would show similar disparity and saying that they were at their limits. Kano was kind enough to take out one of her food rations and give it to them, although reluctantly, causing the third one of the group to get excited at the sight of food, while telling them to not be so stingy, even though that was clearly not what was happening, and she had the right to keep her food for herself if she wanted. Sota internally sighed and knew that he wanted to get rid of these men fast. But once again, his thoughts were interrupted when the new group of people felt more rejuvenated after eating and wanted to explore the castle. The dark-haired boy was surprised by the reaction, and asked if they really were going to the citadel, suggesting that it would probably be better if they went home since they were all tired. The other male was confused by this response and continued, saying his group had found an unexplored map on the 7th floor, so he felt that he and his group should explore it without question. Sota knew that this was going to be a pain, but the way that this man had worded his sentence meant that this group really didn't know anything about the gate, and this way of thinking was expected when one didn't know about the gate. After they walked off, Sota told Kano that the group was likely going to go home on their own after fighting some golems, but the both of them complained about the meal that had been taken from them. Plus, Kano thought they didn't smell good, and pinched her nose as emphasis. Sota explained they had likely been diving for several days, but Kano believed that her brother was a higher level than them. However, Sota believed it could be otherwise. She was going to use a skill called Simple Appraisal on them to see an opponent's stats, but Sota stopped her, as it would let them know that she used it, and would increase an opponent's hate level toward them, or would be considered rude when used on other people. Sota walked up a bit farther and suggested that he should tell this new group their stats, and that they could now use the skill when given their consent, and Kano and Sota were able to see the names, jobs, level, and number of skills the three men had. Kano asked about it, and Sota explained that they were going to retreat after defeating a couple of golems, and that they should give up on monopolizing this hunting ground. But one of the men leaned forward and wondered what they were whispering about. The dark-haired boy started to stutter and suggested that they should split into two groups and explore for efficiency. The two groups went around the place, and Sota was slicing through golems, while Kano would have the job of destroying the cores, until they would become higher level to start selling the gems. The little girl hummed and thought before agreeing, and Sota grinned back before the other group found them again, and said that they found a weird skeleton in the castle saying it looked strong, and that they should try to form a party to defeat it. Sota glanced at Kano before trying to decline the offer. However, the main guy of the group, Masaru, started to get aggressive, and mentioned how his group was a branch of a group called the Colors, making Sota remember the bully from earlier, which meant this guy was the bully's brother. Sota still tried to refuse and claim that he and his sister would drag them down, but mostly he just didn't want to get involved and get on the bad side of these guys. Even so, Sota knew there was no choice and glanced over at his sister while understanding that arguing wasn't good, so he agreed to take the offer. With that, everyone walked toward the door and Kazuya said that they should use appraisal on it for now, preparing to open the door. Sota believed that they should be able to defeat the skeleton without a problem, as he assumed that it would be around level 9 or 10, since it would be a hard time if it was level 11 or higher. But when Kazuya peeked in and appraised it, he started to run away with fear. The male screamed about how there was no way they could beat it, because it was level 25, immediately getting blown to pieces in one attack, as there was now a hole in the door that showed the monster standing up with its hand outstretched after using the attack. Masaru's eyes widened in shock as he called out Kazuya's name, as the third male of their group was blown to pieces, effectively killing him, as there was no way to revive him. The two men stood there silent due to how much the tables had been turned on them. Inside the throne room, the skeleton monster had stood up from the chair, walking forward, while holding its hand out after aiming its attack toward the male who'd attempted to run away. Its cloak hugged its body, and everyone stared toward the monster while Reo screamed in confusion about a guy with such a high level being on the 7th floor, to which Sota looked at Kano and told the little girl that they were going to choose to run. She agreed and attempted to run, however she was surprised when her legs gave out and caused her to collapse to the floor. This wasn't out of exhaustion or fear. Rather, Kano glanced behind her and saw her heels had been slashed, looking up to see Masaru with a dagger in his hand. He apologized, even if it was obvious that he wasn't sorry, and explained that there was no chance that they could run away, and that they couldn't let everyone there die, so he was going to sacrifice Kano and let her be killed to try to give them a chance to run away. As he continued to run away, Kano called out to her brother, who glanced at her and continued to run. Inside, the feelings from the old Sota were going crazy at the fact that Sota was seemingly not trying to help his sister, and Masaru and Reo were surprised he was leaving her as well, continuing to run down the hall. As they ran, Sota grabbed at the handle of a nearby door and slipped into the room, while Kano would think back to a memory from 7 years ago. Kano was apparently watching from afar at the scene of Kaoru being bullied by some other kids, and she felt too timid to fight back, to which the boys would try to hit and grab at her. However, there was someone there to call out the behavior of these boys and tell them to stop what they were doing. Within moments, Sota ran into the playground and stood in between Kaoru and the 3 boys, surprising her as he tried to protect the girl. The boys were confused and said Sota had nothing to do with the situation, and the dark-haired boy started to hesitate with his words, since he didn't learn much in the classes they were all in, but he still had the confidence that he could still try to beat up these kids, charging forward and attempting to punch the 3 boys. In the end, he lost, and the boys successfully beat up the both of them, but Kaoru still wanted to thank Sota for his effort, despite both of them getting hurt. Kano walked a bit forward and continued to stare in silence, feeling disappointed that she was too scared to do anything against those boys when her brother could. Sota was able to do the things that she couldn't, and the girl always admired him as a hero, but now, at the current day and time, she had a moment of wondering if Sota really left and abandoned her. As the monster walked up to Kano's body despite her moment of worry, the girl knew that Sota would never leave or abandon her, grinning as Sota activated his Void/Shock skill, blasting at the skeleton monster from just around the corner. The inner Sota was even surprised by this action, as Sota charged forward and stood in between Kano and the skeletal monster, his veins popping as the monster was thrown into the distance and crashed into a wall. He apologized for being late, and Kano complained about it since her feet were hurting, but he wondered if she thought he was going to leave her, to which she had no hesitation when responding she never thought such a thing. Sota grinned before telling her to get as far away as she could even with her slashed heels, explaining that he wasn't coming with her for the moment as the monster would catch up if the both of them ran, and so Sota was going to defeat it. As Kano would try to get away as fast as she could, Sota ran to the monster who was still trying to get up from the ground, raising his arms high in the air with his blade, while telling the skeletal monster they should change places in the location they were battling. With that, Sota slammed his blade into the ground, causing the environment and floor around them to collapse, breaking open so the monster and Sota would drop into the next floor of the building. Sota's face was still emitting a sort of cloud-like substance from the veins that popped out of the sides of Sota's face. As the two fell down to the next floor of the building, the dark-haired boy thought about why he was able to use Void/Shock, despite it originally causing him to go unconscious from the heavy use of mana, and the fact that he shouldn't have the skill at all. After doing a lot of experimenting, Sota was able to find the answer, that being that he used to have the skill from inside the game back in his original world. He didn't quite know the reason why, but the skills he acquired inside the game in his previous world were also skills he could use in this world. Considering the mana consumption, Sota activated 3 of the following: Satana Chia's Stem Cell, a skill from the highest grade job, Demon Lord, where one would get a strong regeneration ability in exchange for mana, Shadow Step, also from a high grade job which would increase one's agility and evasion greatly, and finally, Overdrive, a skill that would increase the user's close combat ability, as well as their dynamic visual acuity and reflexes, for a set period of time. In that moment, Sota used his simple appraisal skill to truly check on the stats of this skeletal monster. Its name was Wolgamut, a unique boss that had spawned down here, and it was the race of a skeleton noble, having 4 skills at level 25. While in the air, the monster raised its hand once again, but instead of a magical attack, it summoned a blade, and was seemingly observing the situation before doing anything rash. Sota was surprised by the action, and internally apologized for his suddenness, but he didn't have the time to let the enemy try and figure out how to defeat him. Within seconds, still falling from the air, Sota used one of the nearby debris to stand on and allow himself to dash forward, breaking the debris in the process, as the dark-haired boy prepared his blade. The 2 clashed weapons, and Sota knew that with his level 10 body, he was not going to be able to perform as well as when he was the top ranker in the Dunx game from his previous world. He especially knew such a fact when he could both feel and see the cuffs around his arms starting to crack, but that wasn't going to slow him down, as he needed to defeat the monster at any cost. The skeleton Wolgamut was able to get a slash in on Sota's chest, but the boy was already in the middle of preparing another attack, thinking about how he had used a potion earlier as a dope to help him fight against this monster, and be able to use his skills despite not being the proper level to use them yet. But for just 2 minutes, this would work. Sota was able to connect his blade with the body of the skeleton, sending the 2 of them farther down the air, and finally crashing into the floor of the next area. The 2 got up, and Sota dashed toward it again without delay, but Wolgamut seemed to be faster, its eyes glowing from its skull, before it slashed from Sota's shoulder down his entire torso, making Sota lose a part of his armor. Sota was then kicked in the face and sent flying across the large area, crashing through the handrails of many sets of stairs, until he crashed through a wall and into some sort of room. During all of this, the dark-haired boy was getting exhausted and frustrated, since this skeletal monster was reading his moves even if it was an undead. Sota started struggling to get back up, and was already trembling, even though it had been 40 seconds since the battle started, and he was already forcefully using his skills, making Sota feel as though his whole body was being chopped to pieces, and as if he was losing his sight. Suddenly, Sota felt his veins popping from other parts of his body, and felt a searing pain course through him, as blood spilled out from multiple wounds. But this wasn't caused by the skeletal monster. Either way, Sota collapsed to the floor, and more clouds emitted from every part of his body, as the boy would try to push himself from the ground. He grinned weakly and spoke to himself about how it wasn't always like this, how he would struggle against an enemy, but he wondered if Wolgamut was underestimating him at all. As the male finally got back up from the ground, his trembling hand pointed forward, as Sota told the skeletal monster to give him all it's got. With that, Sota charged forward and broke through the wall once again, leaping into the air with ease, the smoke flowing behind him in the path that he took, as it almost seemed as if he had lost all the weight that Butao gained over the years in just seconds with whatever activated. Sota had a grin on his determined face, and felt fired up for his next move, activating a skill called Disaster Aerial, as he continued charging forward toward the skeletal monster and preparing his blade. But that wasn't the only thing Sota was doing. This skill, along with the others he had activated, caused the dark-haired boy to take leaping steps through the air, as if every place he stepped was the ground, giving him the ability to dash behind the monster and get a slash in on Wolgamut. Kano sat there on her knees due to the fact she couldn't really move that much despite her brother telling her to get away, and the girl was watching the battle from afar. After Sota was able to get a slash in on the skeletal monster, he immediately dashed away and prepared for his next move. Aerial was a skill that gave a person the ability to create footing wherever the user would like, making it Sota's favorite skill to use for close-quarter fights. With this, the effects of the doping only had 30 seconds left, but it would be enough time for Sota given the new skill he had activated. His expression turning serious, Sota charged forward once again, and prepared to slash at Wolgamut, who also had its only blade ready, and the 2 clashed their blades together. But that was when something unexpected happened. When the skeletal monster had its eye glow through its skull again, It seemed to have activated something, a glowing light that formed around it, and caused Sota to be thrown away into the distance. This glowing light and intimidating energy was not even a spell, and it surprised Sota when he realized that Wolgamut was using its aura just to send him away. The dark-haired boy grinned to himself and felt as though he could win against the skeletal monster, using the aerial skill to charge forward using the air. With that, Sota prepared his blade again, feeling almost hyped up from the adrenaline of the battle. Kano continued to watch in silence, and she had all the faith in the world in knowing her brother would win. However, that didn't stop the girl from feeling as though she was going to continue to be a burden to the dark-haired boy. She felt as though it was because she was so weak that Sota was in such a situation, and that he was in such a condition where he was pushing himself past his limits and using multiple important items and risky skills at his level just to protect her. Kano felt something boil within her, and wanted to say something despite feeling as though it would be a bad time, considering her brother was in the middle of a difficult battle. But she still wanted to say it, as she had always looked up to her brother over the years. It started out as a mutter, as she thought back to the memories from all those years ago, until it turned into a full-blown shout, yelling enough to where Sota would hear it all the way down in the next level, as the girl begged Sota to win. With these words said, Sota felt even more motivated and started to yell a battle cry, using his aerial skill once again right in front of the skeletal monster in order to get enough force to slash at and send it flying. However, he wasn't done with the attack. Sota charged behind the monster and slashed at it once again, and then Sota dashed to another angle and slashed again. He did this multiple times, and the skeleton monster was feeling overwhelmed by the hundreds of attacks that were happening in such a short amount of time, looking around the area and still not being able to do much to counter it. As the battle continued, the force of it all was enough to make one side of the citadel completely collapse, and the two continued this fight in the air. Sota was upside down compared to the skeletal monster at some point, but still had more attacks up his sleeve, activating another skill called Blade of Agaris, as Wolgamut used its own magical attack, while its one eye would glow once again through its skull. The two attacks combined caused a gigantic explosion that gleamed brightly throughout the area, blinding Kano, who stared from the top floor, as she continued to sit there, and caught the attention of Masaru and Reo, who were still on their way of escaping the area. Debris fell from the sky and crashed against the ground every now and then, as the clouds of dust slowly blew away. Sota felt apologetic to the old Butao as he chuckled to himself, knowing that he had definitely pushed his limits. He glanced down at his arms, one of them seemingly in the middle of regenerating as he had completely lost it in the final attack, but he stared forward and grinned at the skeletal monster, knowing that this was his win. While mentioning how fun the battle had been, Kano started to grunt to herself, feeling the symptoms of leveling up, despite the fact she wasn't able to do anything against the monster, which made her feel like she had to level up even more from now on. With that in mind, the little girl gulped, and stood up before jumping down from the high place, seemingly healed at the parts of her heels as she landed without a problem. She ran up toward her brother, who had seemingly collapsed on the ground, and was still regenerating his lost arm while he was face down, causing Kano to pause for a moment and look at the male with a bit of worry, asking if he was truly okay. Sota started to laugh to himself, and weakly reassured her he was fine, and that his legs were just worn out, making him apologize as he mentioned that he was going to faint. Kano kneeled down next to the dark-haired boy and started to turn flushed, her eyes filling with tears, as she thanked Sota for his efforts that he had made in protecting her. After defeating Wolgamut, Sota was exhausted, only barely opening his eyes to the sight of his sister leaning over him and checking on his status. Kano looked worriedly at her brother, who struggled to sit up, reassuring her that he was okay, as he glanced down at his trembling legs, which meant that he currently could not walk. However, at Sota's current level, it should heal after some time, and he especially needed to wait for it himself, since he couldn't go to the school's medical office. They would use appraisal on him, which would reveal his level. Kano spoke up during the brief pause and apologized, her gaze falling to the ground as she believed the entire situation had gotten to such desperate lengths due to her leg getting cut, which impeded her ability to run on her own. The dark-haired male didn't immediately reassure Kano after hearing her regrets. Instead, he looked over and wondered if he could ask her for a favor. With this, he made his little sister pick his body up and carry him over her back through the debris. He guided her to bring him over to the corpses of the people they had just recently met in that area, who were unable to escape from the attacks of Wolgamut. After burying their remains, Sota kneeled and gave a prayer for the recently dead. As Kano watched in silence, the boy spoke up and finally responded to what she had said from earlier, and assured her that it was not all because of her own faults that things led to how they were. Rather, it was because he had fought Volgamut out of his own free will. It was true he could have used his skills to carry the girl and run away successfully, but in that moment, he knew that he didn't want his sister to have to witness the other guys getting abandoned. Even though it was Sota's idea to journey through this dungeon, it was his fault that she got injured, so he bowed and apologized profusely. The girl was silent for a moment, before softly smiling, leaning down and reassuring that things were okay in the end, all because it was him who specifically brought her there instead of anyone else. It wasn't clear if this forgiveness was enough for the boy, but Kano wanted to put the regrets aside, getting up and asking if it was okay for them to bury the others when there was a chance that they would come back. Sota explained that dungeons had the ability to repair themselves, and would absorb foreign objects along with fixing any structures that were originally destroyed. Even if the corpses disappeared, he felt as though burying them and mourning them was still important. This touching moment was interrupted by the loud rumble of Sota's stomach, which he didn't take note of since it was embarrassing to have happened during such a time. After relocating, Kano brought back some food for the dark-haired boy, who intended to eat all of it by himself. Kano wondered if it was really okay for them to go down to the 10th floor on their own after what had happened, to which Sota had no hesitation in confirming, since he knew that there was a shop to get healed at owned by someone he referred to as Obaba. The name that Sota referred to the owner as made Kano imagine a humble old woman that they would be meeting. Sota continued devouring the food without ever wavering in his speed, his body seemingly slowly going back to its original size from before the Volgamut battle. He explained to his sister that his level would be exposed if he went to the school for healing, confusing Kano as to why that would be a bad thing. The dark-haired male put his boots back on and mentioned how everyone in the academy was being competitive, even though they were all still in single-digit levels, so their levels being revealed would get them in trouble. With that, the two got up and were ready to set off to their next destination. As they made their way toward the next floor, Sota finally realized that his body had returned to its original state, disappointing him as he squeezed at his belly. Kano expressed her curiosity and wondered what kind of things that the shop sells, to which Sota told the girl to treasure her clothes more. She was confused by the comment but couldn't comment on it since the topic quickly passed on to Sota explaining that the shop was a store in the dungeons that was filled with rare items that were worth the price. His plan was to resell the items, his tone so casual that it bewildered the young girl since she wasn't sure if that was allowed. Sota was confident that this was okay to do and that Kano could confirm it with the store, but the reason they needed to do this was to get money and rental equipment, so he would let Kano use any leftovers after what he was going to do. As they walked down the stairs to the next floor, there was a grassy part of the room with a door at the opposite end of the area. Knowing how it works, Kano was excited to charge forth and turn the key, but Sota didn't seem content with the sudden action. The girl stared with curiosity and wondered if the door would lead into the shop, not realizing the monster forming behind her, calling out to the girl to alert her of the incoming attack of the gatekeeper. In a short amount of time, the door slipped open, and the monster right outside was obliterated within seconds, its remains turning to dust. Kano's trembling body turned around to see who had saved her, seeing a tall, cloaked woman with horns and eyes with vertical slits. She had an intimidating glare, asking who was calling her Oba-chan. This woman, whose real name was Furufuru, was a demon who was over 1,000 years old and received various knowledge about the dungeon. However, if someone called her Obaba or Granny or another name of similar caliber, she would have kill you. The demonic woman led Kano and Sota to a building which was her shop, letting the two explore, while Furufuru let out a puff of smoke from her pipe. Sota's sister stared with awe at some weapons, shocked to see how they were made with mithril. He was surprised to see his sister knowing a lot, despite being the one learning everything from him, but the dark-haired boy had to explain to her that it was just mithril alloy. Even so, such items would sell for great amounts at a guild. She wondered if they paid using yen at this shop, to which Sota chuckled, saying this shop only used the dungeon's currency or magic stones as payment. He reminded Kano of the things they collected from the orcs and bone guy earlier, teaching Kano about what was the right things to use in this shop. So far, they had about 138 copper coins, so Sota took the pouch out of his bag and called for the demonic woman's attention. He politely asked for recovery from abnormal effects, to which the woman closed her book shut and agreed, as long as she was given 3 copper coins for the service. Furufuru got up from her chair and leaned close, grabbing the sides of Sota's face and staring intently. Silence filled the air before she stood back up, letting out a breath and clapping her hands once. Within seconds, Sota could feel his legs and body healing from his previous condition. He tried to stretch to test out if everything was working, but Furufuru didn't seem to be done, grabbing Sota's face to stare at him once again. Sota felt awkward and embarrassed by the situation, hoping that things would be quick since Kano was there. The demonic woman let go of Sota's face, but placed her index finger on the boy's forehead, slowly healing the injuries he had gotten in his eyes. She mentioned that she noticed he pushed himself a bit too far, letting him know that she healed his eyes for free. Sota thanked the woman for her kindness, explaining that he had only done so since there was an irregular monster within the higher floors. In the end, it still remained a mystery as to why such a thing was on the 7th floor given its power. If Sota didn't have any interests in Dunex's armored night job, he never would have gone to that citadel. As Kano explained her curious exploration of the shop, Sota mentioned wanting to change his job, to which the woman explained there was a crystal he could use. The young girl wanted to join along, following her brother to an orb that looked ordinary to her. Sota agreed that its appearance was uninteresting, but that wasn't surprising to him. He reached his arm out to the crystal, which glowed brightly as his skin touched the surface of the orb, and both Sota and Kano felt something changing within themselves, as their job titles turned into one of a thief. After the purchases and services were paid for, the two siblings would leave the shop with a bag in their hands of the items they acquired. Sota told the demonic woman that he was already thinking of buying from her shop again in the future, hoping that she would treat them well next time. Furufuru agreed that she would, expressing her contentment after having felt lonely for a long while since her last customer. As she said that, she was reminded of a human who had come by the shop recently, confusing Sota with this information. He had researched the guild's library and couldn't find anything about the DLC including any information about this shop. So, if a human came here, then it could only be one person. The dark-haired boy asked what kind of person this human was, feeling disappointed by the lack of answers since Furufuru couldn't remember any features to name about the human. All she did remember was that the human left her shop without buying anything, and only came to ask one question. Did someone come here? With that, Sota had enough to confirm that it was a player who had visited Obaba's shop. Just like those men that Sota met earlier, it wasn't just a coincidence. People could buy things with magic stones at this store, but most wouldn't know about it, which meant that people wouldn't encounter the monsters leading toward the path. It was also impossible to not have any magic stones this far down, so there was no reason why someone wouldn't buy anything. Knowing all this, Sota could safely assume that it was someone from school, likely someone who intervened with Akagi and Karia's duel. He couldn't figure it out easily since he didn't have any friends at school, but this would be a thought for another day, since Sota suddenly collapsed and went unconscious. The dark-haired boy slept until noon the next day, coming home when it was already dusk. Sota apologized for his late arrival and pretended that he had gotten Kano to skip school with him, but it seemed as though his younger sister noticed something and quickly made her way to her room, with her reasoning being to rest. While that might not have been a lie, it was clear that she likely didn't want to deal with the situation that Sota would have to when he walked into the dining room. Kaoru was there eating at the table as she stood up from her chair abruptly. Sota was confused by her presence, to which the girl mentioned noticing his absence at school, and admitted that she thought he was defeated by slime again. Sota cringed at her response, not wanting that embarrassing situation from last time to happen again, even if that prior situation was a misunderstanding anyway. The dark-haired boy brought Kaoru outside, as she asked to make sure that he hadn't passed out or had a near-death experience, to which Sota had to bluntly refuse out of bewilderment that the girl would think that. It seemed as though that wasn't the only reason she was there, awkwardly shifting in place, as the boy finally spoke and mentioned wanting to apologize for the other morning. He remembered how he acted, and Kaoru seemed to hopefully have been satisfied with this apology, as the dark-haired boy felt nervous about this whole situation. All that was going through his mind was how he didn't want Kaoru to use appraisal on him, but the girl finally broke the awkward silence and started to walk away. As she left, Sota was starting to realize how this Kaoru was completely different from the Kaoru he knew from Dunex. Since he didn't become a healer, he was going to need to be careful. With a sigh of relief, Sota turned back to his home, knowing that it was the only place in this world he could relax. Kano was the one who saved him when he was at the lowest point in his life while his parents were both doting and kind. He was supposedly the outstanding first son, but Sota knew that he was keeping a secret from his family, that being that he had taken over the original Sota's body. Along with that, he was hiding the fact that he had brought Kano to dungeon dive with him, but the latter secret was one that he was wanting to reveal to them, since Kano was now at a higher level. He wondered how his parents would react, since Daisuke, Sota's father, used to dungeon dive with his friends back in the day. With that, the dark-haired male walked back inside his home and entered the dining room where everyone was still seated. Kano was seated at the table as well, and it seemed as though the discussion with his family was going to have to happen now, since Sota's father asked the boy if they could have a moment, letting Sota stare at the boots that were laid out on the table. Daisuke mentioned the information and stories that he had heard relayed from Kano, including how outsiders were treated poorly, but Sota wanted to reassure that things like this were necessary, especially since Kano wanted to go to an adventurer school. His father paused for a moment and mentioned that Sota didn't have to strictly follow the word of the law or his own parents, surprising Sota by how open his father was being. Daisuke was going to be lenient and believe Sota's word about how this was for self-defense, but he wondered if the end goal really had to be adventurer school. Sota's father wanted to ask if it wasn't too late to change schools, explaining that Sota could still be an adventurer without having to go to the school. The dark-haired boy knew that this couldn't happen, since changing schools meant that he couldn't control the story, so he tried to claim that his father was exaggerating, and that this was just a matter of physique. That reasoning made Sota's father wonder why Kano would have been brought along if that were all, to which Sota mentioned insurance, which still wasn't satisfactory to Daisuke. The father couldn't stand the thought of his children going to a school like that just to come home getting hurt. Daisuke's children were all that the male cared about, so he was struggling to find a compromise that didn't stress him out over the safety of his own children. Sota went silent, sweat dropping over the situation, as his father continued and admitted that he knew all this might seem selfish from Sota's perspective, but Daisuke reminded the boy that everyone in this family was the apple of his eye and was important to him. Such word choice made Sota attempt to find humor within his father's words, pointing out the phrase that Daisuke had used, but his father was quick to speak when telling Sota that he wasn't joking around. This shut the boy up again, and created more tense silence, before his mother spoke up as well, explaining that they were not trying to force him to leave, rather wishing to know the reason why Sota was so persistent in going to the adventurer school. It wasn't about the scenario. It wasn't about World War. Sota thought long and hard about his answer, as he knew that such levels of reason weren't something that he should say to them. What was the reason that Narumi Sota would be in adventurer school? That was the question that he needed to answer. With that, the answer was clear in his mind. A flash of a familiar face that seemed to have come from Butao in a sense that made it feel as though Sota was feeling it himself. If that was what Butao seemed to want, then Sota would follow through. Looking back up at his parents, the dark-haired boy explained that this was all for the sake of wanting to protect someone. After Sota's answer, silence filled the dining room of the Narumi household once more. Daisuke felt hesitant, reminding the boy about how Kano came home injured along with Sota himself. Kano's eyes widened, and she almost wanted to jump in to correct her father, but the memory of what Sota said made her stay quiet for the moment. Their father continued, apologizing for such a discussion and situation, since it was obvious that they didn't want to get injured in the first place. Daisuke turned his head to his wife, who nodded at him, implying that they have already discussed what to do prior to this conversation. With that, Sota's father explained that for Kano to do dungeon diving, Sota would have to bring their father or mother along for the journey as the only condition. This shocked the two siblings, especially since it would be potentially dangerous given Daisuke's level. Their father was aware that he might not be as capable compared to someone stronger than him, but he believed that he could still do some things, since he had been diving in the dungeons before the two were born. He hung his head low, feeling as though he couldn't just sit there and watch while his kids get injured while he couldn't be there since he was supposedly weak. This was something that Daisuke wanted Sota to understand, turning to Sayuki for further explanation. She turned to Sota and mentioned that they were not scolding him because he was still a child. Heck, she even said that the boy could ignore their worries and go back to what he'd been doing before. Regardless, she wanted him to know that they were aware of just how dangerous the dungeon was, and still sent Sota off despite that. After hearing and processing the worries of his parents, Sota decided that he would comply, and just decide to leave Kano in the care of his parents. He wondered if that was okay to the young girl, turning to her and watching her nod in affirmation. After that long discussion, Sota went to his room and flopped onto his bed, thinking back on the words shared today, as he realized that he had forgotten the feelings of his family. Rather, it was more like Sota took advantage of them. Silence filled the air as he reflected on everything that brought him to this point. sitting up on the bed and glancing down at his body, as he wished that his family would have had such stern talks with him in order to prevent him from becoming overweight. That was when he remembered the bag of items he had gotten from Obaba's shop, taking out a magic wand that he had bought, which would give him the ability to use an appraisal that was a higher class than the usual simple appraisal. This would make things more detailed than looking through the default menu, so the dark-haired boy proceeded to use the wand on himself, writing down all the info he had learned from the appraisal on a notebook to reflect on. Sota realized that his appetite increased whenever he would try to lose weight, but this also explained why his legs were weak. Either way, the status that he got from leveling up wasn't bad. The boy was hesitating on whether he should overwrite the skill or not, but Sota decided that for now he would leave it alone. After that fight, he regained his lost weight, and it was all because of this skill. There was another thing he learned from the appraisal, reading what he wrote, which made the boy lean back in his chair and sigh. Sota apologized to Bu Tao, and said that it looked like he was going to be borrowing his body for a little while longer. School was to start again the next day, and Sota planned to check in on Yuma's recent activity, along with gathering some information on other players in the school. So the boy knew he needed to brace himself. What he didn't predict was that the school day would revolve around a group activity, something the dark-haired boy despised. It seemed as though everyone immediately found the members of their groups, to which Sota frantically whipped his head around and asked if there was anyone without a partner yet, trying to reassure that it wouldn't be a net negative if they were to mingle with him. No one responded to his pleas, which made the dark-haired boy worry, especially since he couldn't just pair up with the teacher. It wasn't referenced in the game, but as a teacher in the Adventurer School, he was also in charge of the PE class, which implied that he was really strong. Since Sota hadn't told the school about his level ever since he was level 3, it would be obvious about his difference in strength if he were to spar with someone strong. As the boy continued looking around the room, someone frightened him by putting a hand on his shoulder, making Sota worry that it was the teacher, but he was surprised to see a girl approaching him. Sota recognized this person as Umiya, seemingly making her sigh in relief that he remembered her name. Umiya noticed that he hadn't found a pair, and mentioned that her usual choice was absent, so she wondered if it was okay to pair with her. Sota stared at the girl, knowing that Umiya was a person who was still named in the game, even if she wasn't one of the main heroines of Dunx. The fact that this girl was talking to a character like Bu Tao made him dismiss the possibility of Umiya being a player, so he accepted the offer, and walked with the girl to another part of the room to spar. As they walked about the room, Sota overheard another person mentioning the absence of their sparring partner as well. Sota glanced back at Umiya and felt good about the situation, believing that his youth had finally come, but he couldn't help but notice Yuma in the distance with a serious expression as the red-haired boy sparred. Just like any average high school, the Adventurer School also had clubs. This was the first Kenjutsu club. A boy could be seen flying across the room during the match, immediately leading to the end of said match. The opponent of Yuma panted heavily and looked down at the red-haired boy with disappointment, as it was explained that they would have let Yuma join the club if he had won against their weakest member. Kaoru and the others ran up to Yuma's defeated form, while people around the club room insulted their class rank, wondering if Yuma was really one of the stronger ones in Class E. Another person mentioned that they heard there was a guy in Class E who was defeated by a slime, laughing about the rumor. Suddenly, the sound of a hand slamming on a desk brought Kaoru out of her rumination, as a few girls of her class explained to the girl that they were thinking of removing Kaoru and Sanjo from the party. Their reasoning was that their levels were the same even though the roles were split equally, along with Yuma continuing to get injured. The girls theorized that Kaoru had just seduced Yuma and Tachigi to get them to join her party, but the blue-haired girl tried to speak up, only to get interrupted, as one of the girls claimed that Kaoru was only able to level up because of Yuma, and that Kaoru looked down on the rest of Class E. Kaoru gripped the edge of her desk, as another student involved herself in the situation, Umiya, who insisted that Yuma wasn't that kind of person. The girls laughed at the sight of Umiya joining the conversation, trying to diminish Umiya's image by asking her why she had been seeing Murai a lot. Kaoru had enough, and stood up from her desk, her height towering over the other girls, as Kaoru explained that Umiya was seeing the teacher and putting in the effort to give Class E a club. She also explained that she was a part of Yuma's party because she was lucky, but she was aware of the gap in level and experience. With that, Kaoru bowed and pleaded for the party to be watched over for now. Kaoru relayed that moment to her party, and Sanjo suggested that Kaoru shouldn't have lowered her head, making Kaoru chuckle, since Umiya said the same thing. However, it was clear that these girls were expressing their worries, even if it was in a wrong way. Everyone entered this school because of their talent and skills, so it must be frustrating to feel outclassed. Tachigi gave a playful punch to Yuma and explained that there weren't many good guys like Yuma, mentioning that everyone's spirits were being worn down by the adversities Yuma was facing. Yuma felt disappointed by the situation, and felt as though it was all his fault, knowing that he could reassure Class E if he were just a little stronger. The man in glasses frowned at Yuma's response, and told the party that they should head back now since they couldn't afford to miss the match between classes. As they started to head back, Tachigi told Kaoru that he wanted to start a training group in preparation for the match in June. The idea surprised her, as Tachigi reached into his jacket and pulled out some papers, handing them to Kaoru as he explained that they could train the bottom of their class up. Kaoru wondered if the mail had told anyone else, to which Tachigi explained having told Sakurako, but not having told Yuma about the idea yet, since it would only get the red-haired male worked up. She wondered if Majima was debriefed about the idea, mentioning that he was a similar level as them, and that he would likely lend a hand. Tachigi had told the idea to Majima, and another person from their class, telling them how the target was to train people with the low levels. This made the man in glasses remember how Sota was still level 3 according to the database, making him still confused as to how the dark-haired boy lost to a slime of all monsters. Despite what the records say, Tachigi did express the potential of the reality of Sota's power being different. Kaoru dismissed such a thing, and didn't believe that Sota had a reason to make himself look weak, so she was going to trust the data they had, which Tachigi would keep in mind. He paused for a moment and glanced down, asking the girl if she had been training outside the dungeon as well. She became flustered and wondered if her body looked more muscular than usual, to which Tachigi assured her it wasn't something to be ashamed of, especially given her fighter title. The caster sighed and mumbled about how Yuma was also seemingly fine with the situation, confusing Kaoru, as Tachigi mentioned that Yuma's performance was dropping each day. He remembered how Yuma would ruminate on his losses, explaining to the party that he must get stronger or else he couldn't protect his dignity. Ever since that day, Yuma had forced himself to train and get stronger, but this wasn't what the party was made for, so Tachigi wondered if Kaoru would assist him in stopping Yuma. Meanwhile, Sota was hanging out with Umiya and another girl in the hallways of the school, the two complimenting Sota on his physique. The situation was making Sota feel overconfident, telling himself out loud about how the day was feeling like a good day, and making a joke that he felt like he could even take on a slime. It seemed as though the joke wasn't well received, since the two girls went silent after he said it. Either way, it had been a few days since the near-death battle against Volgamut where he had acquired the Faker skill. At school, Umiya and her roommate Nitsuta had become Sota's friends, and after school the dark-haired boy would go dungeon diving with his family. Until then, Sota would gather information at the guild's library. To Sota's expectations, this world was the same as when Dunx started, since stuff like Faker and motion casting, or any traces of DLC, were nowhere to be found. The upper limit was also left at level 30, so there were no more doubts around here. Sota made his way through the guild library to a door that stopped him, saying that the documents could only be viewed if one was ranked 8 or above. He wanted to know more about the guys that he met on the 7th floor, and he could progress further if he wanted since Sota was ranked 9, and could take the promotional test to view the documents. This wasn't what he had planned, but he might as well. The dark-haired male went up to the clerk and asked when the rank 8 tests were, learning that they were held every Wednesday, so he waited for that exact day and time and walked into the exam when it was time. He was dressed in a sort of simple armor for the exam, glancing around the room and realizing that he was the only one wearing clothes like he was currently donned in. Sota glanced over at a girl who was putting up her hair in a ponytail, immediately recognizing it was Umiya, which had him hiding behind a wall in confusion as to why she was there now of all times. He was going to have to be careful so the girl wouldn't find out his presence, sitting in the back as the director asked if everyone got their documents. Everyone was told to log in at the URL on the paper, and that each person needed to bring the item they saw back to the guild within the specific time limit. When entering the dungeon, that was when the timer would start, so everyone was free to begin when they were finished preparing. As Umiya stood up and was about to leave the room, Sota's name was suddenly announced, which broke his cover, and the girl noticed his presence. Sota awkwardly waved and approached the director, who gave a corrected map to the boy, to which Umiya peeked over his shoulder and mentioned how they were close in location. The dark-haired male glanced over at the girl and felt a twinge in himself that was Butao angrily telling Sota to not cheat on Kaoru, which Sota was more than aware of not going against. Sota asked the girl why she was taking the test, to which Umiya mentioned the class match at the end of the semester, something Sota was already aware of. He was sure that the difference of level from A to E would be more clear, and Umiya admitted noticing how Yuma's group was working so hard, so she didn't want to give up, and wanted to do everything she could as well. Umiya asked what Sota's reasoning was, and he claimed that he was there for the same reasoning as well. With that, the two went their respective directions. The girl walked down the cavern and saw an opening in the near distance, walking toward the light of the opening. Within seconds, a goblin shot past her and connected with the rough texture of the cavern wall, debris flying the opposite direction of where the monster came from. A man with well-kept hair and glasses was seen standing in the middle of the open area, and was the one who attacked the goblin. He turned around and noticed Umiya's presence, grinning and stating her rank, grade level, and name. The man asked if such information was correct about what he had heard, to which Umiya affirmed of her identity, and wondered if they had met before, given how he knew who she was. She stared with confusion, and would only be filled with more uncertainty when the man mentioned that this was the first time the two of them would be meeting. It was likely to assume that this man was someone from the guild, given how this was an exam given by the guild. So it would make sense that a stranger would know her identity if they were part of the place that would have her records. Deciding to accept the situation as it was, she spoke up once again, and asked if the task was really just that simple, and that she just needed to take the documents that were sitting on the rocky column right next to the man. He only stood there with his simple grin, not responding to her words, which had Umiya shuffle forward toward the scroll of documents. Suddenly, Umiya was hit with the quick movement of the man's fist, getting sent flying across the open room and crashing onto the rocky ground with a thud. He proceeded to pick up the scroll of documents, telling the girl that he was changing the contents of the exam, and that the new rules were to fight him and win, or else she wouldn't pass. As Umiya trembled, trying to get up after the sudden attack which caused her to bleed from her nose and mouth, she looked up and watched as the male started to rip up the documents. He claimed that authority didn't matter, as her fate was already laid out for her choice of being a student in the adventurer school. That word choice made Umiya remember that the director of the exam called Sota forward to give him a different map, making her believe that he was in danger as well, as he was also from the adventurer school. Umiya stood in the middle of the staff office with her patched up injuries, a look of shock and disbelief on her face as she repeated the words she was told. She couldn't believe or accept the truth of the matter, shouting with confusion at the teachers as Murai pushed away from the desk to turn toward the young girl, telling her to not misunderstand the situation, and insisting that the conclusion had already been decided by the higher-ups with authority and strictness. Umiya still refused to be satisfied with the situation, standing there with one closed fist, since the other was in a cast. Murai turned back to his desk, not wishing for any further discussion, and mentioning that it was likely decided because of the higher-ups finding it intolerable with the way that Class E would rebel against the higher classes. He told her to think of this as a natural disaster, sending her off to say her goodbyes to the others, as Tachigi apologized to Umiya and felt responsible with how things ended up. Umiya grabbed the male's hand and assured that it wasn't his fault, telling everyone to not get mad at the wrong people. With that, she walked outside the school into the pouring rain with an umbrella. A flash of the memory of her family wishing her luck as they sent her off to the school went through Umiya's mind. The girl gripped the umbrella tightly and grit her teeth before collapsing to the ground and bursting into tears. That was the end for the Umiya Satsuki that Sota was familiar with. After the man in glasses ripped up the documents, Umiya barely held herself off the ground using her arms to pick herself back up. The girl wondered what was wrong about being a student from an adventurer's school, looking up at the male and watching him adjust the placement of his glasses. He told Umiya that her first crime was that she had nothing noteworthy when entering the school, her second being the fact that she tried to face him, despite him being above her and superior. The man continued naming her so-called crimes, mentioning that she shouldn't have stepped into the world of adventurers with no power, saying that it was disgraceful for her to be looked down on by the average adventurer. Umiya attempted to charge forward and slash at the man in glasses, but he dodged out of the way, mentioning he was level 13. Despite that, the girl still tried to fight back and aimed her blade toward the male, spinning her body to try and pierce him at full force. Unfortunately, he was able to stop the attack without a sweat, the man mentioning there was supposedly no chance he would lose to someone from Class E. The man proceeded to punch Umiya once again, sending her crashing against the cavern wall. He told her that he was just lying when saying that she would pass if she won against him, telling her that it would have been better for her if she had just played dead after the first hit. The man started to walk toward the exit while still talking, saying that he was able to confirm that the students from the adventurer school had nothing to talk about, and that their power was childish. As he made his way toward the exit, Umiya still had stamina left in her to dash off the ground and guard the exit with a heavy breath. The male smacked her away again, but Umiya grabbed onto his clothing and clutched onto him tightly. This was starting to enrage him. Feeling offended that he was being stopped from going to the area where Sota was, he kicked the girl away and stomped toward her, complaining loudly about how he was going to personally deal with her and Sota. As the male's punch came toward her, all Umiya could think about was her parents' memory of when they sent her off to the school with good wishes. She apologized to them for not being able to push through the challenging environment of the school and this exam, her eyes fluttering shut as she was knocked unconscious without the hope that help would come. Umiya couldn't be promoted. At least, that was what happened before. Suddenly, within seconds, someone charged forward, catching the man in glasses off guard as he was punched directly in the gut. Sota remembered back to when his coworkers would judge him for his intense love for the game of Dunx. But things were different now, and the dark-haired male would make use of his dedication for the game. He wasn't a person who would just accept things as they were. The man in glasses was sent flying toward the cavern wall, knocked unconscious, as Sota mentioned how there were a bunch of evil people in the adventurer school who all lacked power. With that dealt with, the dark-haired male approached Umiya's body and poured a potion into her mouth, thanking her for her attempt in trying to protect him. Meanwhile, Sota's damages and attacks toward the other exam director were noticed by another person within the dungeon, and this mysterious woman decided to investigate the situation, dashing down the cavern halls. Despite how unprofessional and hostile the exam directors were being, Sota used his potion on the one he recently knocked out. Given how expensive the potion was, the dark-haired boy was hoping that it didn't have any side effects that would likely keep him up at night if there were. Thinking back to the things that led up to this point, Sota was able to escape the situation with ease because of his history, which made him cautious at all times. After casting the Aura ability, the other director was immobilized within seconds. The dark-haired male created some craters on the wall to hopefully disguise the situation and hide the fact that he was there. Once he made his way down the cavern, that is how he ended up at our current moment. Sota glanced down at the man and felt surprised at his own action of hitting someone so seriously for the first time. But his inner thoughts were interrupted by sensing a woman stealthily approaching the entrance to the room. He whipped his body around, confused by her presence and putting up his guard due to his lack of recognition of the stranger. Judging from her footsteps and speed, the mysterious woman seemed strong, so Sota wondered if she was a friend of the guy that he had just defeated. The woman asked if he caused the unconscious status of the man on the ground, causing the dark-haired male to sweat drop in hesitance before responding with a lie. Sota claimed that his only intention was taking the rank 8 promotional exams, and that he was just a newbie, telling her to use a simple appraisal if she didn't believe him. He used his faker ability to disguise his real level and stats, but the woman still felt hesitant after his response, since he had an expensive potion that newbies normally wouldn't have. The mysterious woman paused before explaining that she had been hearing about reports involving horrible things done to seemingly only lower-class students from the school, and that the guild couldn't just do nothing. It was supposedly her responsibility to investigate the matter, to which Sota hummed, and decided that it was likely safe to reveal the truth. With that, Sota did admit that he was the one who knocked the man out, but was open to giving the woman the credit. The woman stared at Sota and appraised him, seemingly able to figure out that he had the faker job, which shocked him. All additional content added after the launch of the game shouldn't be commonly known, so how does this person know? Maybe he was too confident about his faker ability. Regardless, the woman reassured him, saying that she wouldn't reveal anything as long as he gave her his contact information. That seemingly was enough to calm him down, hearing that she wanted to know more about the skill if possible. Sota still wanted more assurance that she wouldn't tell anyone, since it could spell trouble for the Narumi family, and the woman apologized before admitting that all she wanted was information, and that Sota could easily kill her if he wanted. Along with that, the woman offered to give information about her clan, giving Sota the initiative. Silence passed, and Sota finally spoke up, insisting that he didn't want anything to spread about the faker job, so he felt fine with them just exchanging their contact info as the base of the trade. She was surprised and slightly hesitant before introducing herself as Kusunoki Kirara, a second year of Class A from the same school as him. Sota felt astonished to hear that she was an upperclassman, but it made him feel more secure when exchanging contact info with her, even though he hid the fact that he was from Class E. After getting Umiya healed at the medical office, he escorted her back to her dormitory, where her roommates seemed extremely worried. Umiya's promotional exam was put on hold while the examiners went into trial. Then there was Sota, who successfully promoted his rank. Back at home, the dark-haired boy told his family about the name of the clan that he encountered, Sorrel. They were a lower branch of Colors, with theirs standing at the very bottom. Because of the death of some of their members due to Volgamut, the clan was more active. It seemed as though Sayuki recognized that name. Hearing about the clan from the guild, Kano asked what the clan was like, to which their mother mentioned that she had never heard anything good about the clan, saying the leader was a very ambitious person. Daisuke asked Sota if he had heard anything back from his classmates, but there still wasn't much of an update for the time being. Sota gazed at the table and felt confused with the current situation, having never heard of such a clan in the Dunx game. Even though it was essential to get close to the other player, Sota's other tasks kept piling up. Suddenly, his attention was grabbed by his father, who changed the subject, asking if the boy had been doing anything with Kaoru lately. Sayuki chuckled with an amused smile, as Sota felt another burden fall upon the pile on his shoulders. Meanwhile, the blue-haired girl sneezed and looked down at her hands, worried that she was possibly getting sick. It was a weird feeling to mourn the people who died in front of him, and truly hurt people by punching them. This kind of life was different to when he would play Dunx just as a game rather than reality. Kaoru got ready for school and visited Sota's house to walk with him to school as usual, but the air was tense and awkward. The boy followed a few feet behind and broke the silence, telling Kaoru that they should stop going to school together from now on, even though he was the one who created this tradition. At least, that was what he would want to say. While it may sound bad, he felt scared to alienate Kaoru since she was an important source of information. Cutting her off would prevent him from getting specific details about Yuma, such as about the static sword and many other questions. Regardless, the matter with the sword was highly likely to do with a player involvement, especially after what happened with the promotional test, so Sota was going to be careful from now on. He stared intently at Kaoru and had a serious aura radiating off of him, which the girl seemed to sense. However, she didn't comment on that as they reached the school. During third period, Nitarisa tried to pair up with Kuga before the dark-skinned girl interrupted and asked Yuma to spar with her. Umiya's roommate was frozen with shock when Kuga claimed that the other girl wasn't much of an opponent, so Sota would pair up with her. As they walked to a separate part of the gymnasium, Sota wondered where Umiya was, to which the girl with glasses explained that Umiya was healed yet still fatigued. She thanked the boy for escorting her but wondered if Sota was also in trouble, to which Sota mentioned that he was able to escape repercussions due to a strong adventurer he had met at the time. Nitarisa wanted to hear more about the situation, especially since he was still known at school as the guy who got defeated by a goblin, but he only laughed awkwardly at the request. As he walked through the room, Sota glanced around and had been recently noticing how diving deeper into the dungeons reminded him of when he used to play the Dunx game. Back then, Sota used to be a player killer. When Dunx started implementing a new system, it was one where players could harm and kill each other, so the male became a player killer for the thrill of it. Because of how easy it was to steal items, there were several disadvantages to it. Being a player killer meant being banned from certain areas and having bounties placed on you, making you a target to others. This meant there were players who specialized in hunting player killers as well. There was a woman that he would often be chased by within the game. The two were almost equal in power whenever they would clash. Moreover, each player killer would have a nickname. As Sota followed Nitarisa to a certain spot, she decided that it would be the place they would spar. The girl mentioned her confidence in her swordsmanship skills, but the dark-haired boy didn't feel too frightened due to the level difference, so he was going to try and pretend to be weaker. However, as the two got into stance, Sota immediately recognized the way Nitarisa was standing. She charged forward but stopped right in front of him, asking if he was known by the alias of Sayaku, the very nickname he was called in-game. Nitarisa leaned forward with a mischievous grin, watching as Sota gawked in disbelief at her question. Back when Sota played this video game, people would call him the Rogue Disaster, which was later shortened to Sayaku. Even if he hadn't answered the girl's question directly, his reaction was enough to confirm his identity. She laughed when knowing she was correct, but this also confirmed Sota's suspicions of other players potentially attending the school. But he didn't expect one of the other players, let alone the first he'd met, to be a familiar face. He asked how she found out, to which Nitarisa admitted that it was due to the promotional exam, since it wasn't an event that occurred in Dunx. At least that's where her suspicions started, and then it all got confirmed after his reaction to her question. She got back to her familiar stance. Sota noted it, and knew that the girl would have used a different stance if her theory had been wrong. Nitarisa saw that Sota had chosen auto-pick when it came to his appearance, giving him the body of Butao, but that implied she chose custom character. She affirmed so, and explained that her current form was what she looked like in real life, but Sota compared it to cosplaying as oneself, making her pout and kick the boy out of annoyance. Surprisingly, such an action didn't hurt at all, increasing Sota's curiosity as he wondered what level she was. Nitarisa admitted to still being level 5, but claimed to have circumstances when it came to being such a low level. Suddenly, she then plunged forward in an attack. It didn't surprise Sota too much, but Nitarisa told him that they would need to actually spar or else the teacher would notice. With that, they would pause the conversation and begin the battle. Meanwhile, Kaoru was lost in her own thoughts, staring at Sota from afar, which caused her to get hit in the head by Sakurako's weapon. After school hours, it turned to night, and Nitarisa asked to meet at the guild square. The boy was about to head out, which caught the attention of his mother, but he reassured her it would only be for a short while. Sota started to walk down the streets and almost crossed paths with Kaoru, who was going for a nightly run, but the blue-haired girl didn't call for his attention and went in the opposite direction. As Sota approached the guild square, Nitarisa was surprised how quickly he arrived. Her teasing attitude was quickly turned into shock at the wand he held in his hand, but Sota ignored her bewilderment and asked to appraise her just to make sure she wasn't lying. Sota used the wand on the girl and confirmed she was level 5, but he also confirmed that players did seem to have a starting skill, just like he did. He broke the silence and told Nitarisa that he didn't intend to team up with her because of her low level, and because he couldn't trust her. Nitarisa frowned at the boy, mentioning the last duel involving Karia, and how he couldn't judge whether the girl was the culprit or not of how it ended. She hummed and insisted they should team up anyway, confusing Sota as to why she wanted to so badly. Nitarisa didn't hesitate to admit that her main goal was to make Umiya happy, confusing the boy even more, since her knowledge could be used to help level the girl up. She still claimed to have circumstances and would reveal the reasons if they teamed up, so Sota asked if there were other merits that would entice him. The girl in glasses hummed, and knew she could be a source to cross-check information with, but she offered to tell information about one other player she knew was giving Karia information. That was one heck of an offer, and it seemed as though Nitarisa had no involvement in intervening, so he decided to accept the request. Nitarisa seemed genuinely surprised by his response, mentioning how he was previously hated by everyone in the game, so she was ready to throw away her chastity to get what she wanted. Sota was quick to explain he didn't want that, and the body of Butao that he inhabited definitely didn't want that either. Plus, a hated character like Butao just happened to be evil, so he would rather have that life stay in the game's fiction. With that, Sota said that they would have a temporary contract to exchange information and negotiate other terms until Umiya would reach level 5. The two bumping fists as confirmation. As the two got ready for the day, Risa knew that she should have searched for more answers more carefully, but after seeing Umiya come back injured from that exam, she couldn't afford to be cautious anymore. When Risa was struggling because of her starting skill, Umiya still supported the girl and ended up being her best friend during this new life. Sota made his way toward the lobby in his simple battle gear, eventually meeting up with Risa, who apologized for taking so long. He didn't seem to care much, but the boy wondered why they needed to be entering the dungeon. Before she would answer, Risa wanted to confirm something. She wondered if it was true that the common knowledge of this world would be from when the game first launched, which Sota agreed to. So it made sense that stuff like the Faker skill and anything else wouldn't be known by the masses, since this content was added after launch. There was something that Sota remembered, a woman he met, and mentioned that woman's identity to Risa, which surprised her, since Kirara was supposedly a named character. The dark-haired boy stood there with confusion and admitted he didn't know much about the female protagonist route of the game, causing Risa to call him an idiot. She explained that Kirara was part of a large clan called the Red Kunoichi, and was targeted by a lot of people. Despite that, the girl in glasses also wondered how the clan would know about the Faker job. to which Sota theorized that there's still a chance of characters learning about DLC. When the two ended up in a certain area that was likely off limits from the public, Risa told Sota that she was going to show him something that could be thought of as a forward payment for their temporary contract. The girl sat on the ground in a meditative pose, seemingly using a normal aura skill, until her body slowly started to fade. Sota was shocked, and noticed he couldn't detect Risa's presence if he didn't look really closely, almost as if she were invisible. She stopped the action and mentioned that it was not a skill she was familiar with, and it wasn't one she acquired, intriguing him to want to learn more. Since aura was a skill that released magic, Risa would match the surrounding magic and adjust the output, similar to adjusting volts of electricity, to send out waves that would match other waves. Because of her trick, another skill became viable, and it meant that one could heal during it. Risa wondered if he also had a troublesome starting skill, but he reassured her that they could easily learn how to counteract the demerits from their skills. The girl admitted that her starting skill gave her a hard time handling things when entering the school, and she even meditated often in the previous world. Because of that, she would meditate to calm herself in this current world as well, but it led to her learning this new trick by accident. Sota mentioned his attempt to learn more about skill activation, but heard nothing of the sort that Risa was going through, so it's likely something of a DLC as well. The dark-haired boy thanked Risa for such a great amount of payment, reminding the girl in glasses about something. She pulled out a scroll and said that she wanted to make the girl sign a contract that would let them know in the case that Umiya would leak any information, but it seemingly was intended to protect Umiya, since Risa wanted to make sure that Umiya truly agreed to their plan. During another day in the dungeon, the contract was laid out for Umiya, who stared with awe, and thought that the hunting grounds they were on was that amazing to have one. Sota knew that wasn't the case, and explained that it was important to hide whatever they could to prevent anyone around them from being in danger. Risa asked Umiya to swear to never tell anyone about what they were about to reveal, since she would have to pay with her life, surprising Sota with how harsh the threat was. Despite the harsh conditions, Umiya wanted to ask if signing the contract would really lead to her becoming stronger, which was her only condition needed. The two had no dismissals, so Umiya hovered her hand over the magic symbol and poured her magic into it, accepting the terms. With that, Sota delved deeper into the dungeon and crossed the bridge to the Yorks, slashing into many of them before luring them toward the wooden path. Umiya was bewildered by his strength before her attention was called by Risa, letting them cut the ropes of the bridge and having it fall in order to kill off the horde within seconds. That was enough to lead to Umiya reaching level 5, and she could immediately feel the changes in her body. Jumping is a test. Sota nudged the arm of the girl in glasses, wondering why Risa lied that the contract would take the life of the girl when all that would happen is the contract burning if the terms were broken. She admitted that it was her way of showing sincerity, mentioning how leveling the two girls up wouldn't profit him. Sota told Risa that he revealed the fast leveling trick because of two reasons. One was because he would be happy to have strong allies, but he was also starting to feel the desire to make Umiya happy as well. He smacked Risa playfully and told her to stop with the lies, seemingly getting the girl to agree. As Risa ran off, Sota remembered the magic contract that Butao and Kaoru made when they were kids, which Kaoru wasn't very happy with early in the school year. Meanwhile, Umiya had been putting all her efforts into one goal, only for it to seemingly be in vain, as her proposal was refused. Even before everything, she had been working hard to make a club for Class E. There were benefits to becoming a club member, one being that you would receive abundant funds from the school. When applying for a club on top of regulations, you would need to find a teacher to be your advisor, or else it would have no chance of being approved. Umiya was starting to feel restless, wondering if she had to fight with the people of the student council, but Risa hugged the girl to calm her down, and asked what Sota thought would be the best next step. He immediately disagreed with the idea of picking a fight with the student council, but he believed that it was okay to ask them the reason for rejection. Umiya still seemed to have a spark of fire in her eyes, so Risa was going to tag along to make sure the girl didn't cause any mayhem. She also glanced over and claimed that she would feel at ease if Sota came as well, making him sigh and agree, as the three marched down the halls of the school while their efforts were noticed by someone. Within the staff office, Murai was approached by a woman who asked if he was going to be the advisor of the club for Class E. She felt concerned, since the higher-ups weren't happy about such a situation. But the teachers knew that Umiya's persistence was more troublesome than his involvement, However, Murai wasn't worried about that future, since he knew that the student council wouldn't allow such a club anyway. The group approached the door of the student council and knocked, hearing a blunt response for them to enter. That voice was from the president, who didn't even look away from the paper he was writing on. His gaze was downward as he demanded for them to state their business. Umiya introduced herself and wished to inquire about the club she wanted to establish, but she was immediately turned down and told to go home. This enraged the girl as she refused to leave, insisting to know the reason for the application's rejection. He sighed, and a cloud of annoyance seemed to float around him, as he mentioned how he was tired of the countless times that pieces of trash wouldn't understand their place. It seemed as though Soto realized that the president was using an aura skill to intimidate the group, causing the boy to stand in front of the two girls to shield them from the effect. Soto locked eyes with the man, but it still didn't end with a victory, as the president told them to leave once again and never come back. They walked down the hall, and Umiya grumbled about how the student council wasn't listening to them as students, and Soto believed it was because they were the student council that they didn't listen. Risa dismissed their words and said they should start over, which Soto agreed with, since he knew that this would have been a waste of time given the usual behavior of nobles. Meanwhile, Tachigi went to a very expensive mansion, bowing respectfully to a woman by the name of Ishiki Otoha. She was a top student of the school and was the heir to her family, but she greeted Tachigi with a gaze of familiarity. They asked about each other's well-being for a brief moment, but the woman knew that he was here for advice. He confirmed her suspicions, but he was hesitant in his actions and words given the two people behind her. Otoha reassured Tachigi that they would keep whatever they heard secret, so he relayed what he saw at the school and wanted the woman to do something about the student council's cold decision. Tachigi was aware of the difficulty of the situation given his own family upbringing, but he wanted to help, since his fellow friends were also training and making efforts toward this goal, even if nothing seemed to be enough, and so he begged for Otoha's help. Dungeons have manifested in this world since the Meiji era, thus history had been diverging. Even to this day, the royalty system still remained strong, and nobles could use legal means to exercise pressure. Otoha decided to agree just this once, but wanted to tell the boy something: the true motive behind the adventurer school. A warrior class was someone who served the nobles, and Tachigi, as the eldest son, was born for that reason. However, when he was little, he had a weak body, and easily got a fever just by moving around. The family that Tachigi's family served was the Ishiki family, which also included their eldest daughter, Otoha. With no clear reason as to why, she also suffered with a weak constitution. Even if their position was different, at the very least they felt sympathetic. Then, one day, Tachigi heard that Otoha would be entering adventurer school, a special place where only the chosen people were allowed to enter. During this time, the boy didn't believe that Otoha would keep up with the environment and come back, but that was more of his desire rather than actual belief. Contrary to what he had hoped, Otoha stood out amongst the rest in just 1 year. At only 13 years of age, she was already being featured in magazines, and Tachigi strongly hoped to be like her. Just her existence alone was enough for Tachigi to motivate him and aim for that same school. And now, here he was, about to learn the reason that the school was established in the first place. This confused Tachigi, since he believed that this was all to raise true adventurers given what was told in the entrance ceremony. Currently in Japan, there were two types of nobility. There were old nobles who had been present since the Meiji period to this day, and there were new nobles, born outside of nobility and rewarded the status after gaining achievements. Otoha explained that old nobles had social privilege and vested interests, which led to the possibility of a lot of business. Those businesses were seemingly betraying the old nobles for new nobles, which meant that the warrior class could fall victim to this action. From the perspective of the old, adventurers with the potential to become new nobles were a threat, which is why there were two countermeasures. One was improving oneself, while the other measure was to simply prevent more new nobles from appearing. That was why the Adventurer School was created, to be used as a place to gather all the excellent commoners and take away their opportunity for greatness. Such information shocked Tachigi, as he accused nobles like Otoha with corrupting the country, but the woman believed it was justified. She asked for confirmation of the class competition starting soon, wondering if he didn't know of the hidden rule. Tachiki affirmed his lack of awareness, to which Otoha explained that there was a rule to call outsiders for help, and that Class E didn't have such. The male knew that there were some who believed it was right to fight unfairly, and Otoha gestured for the people behind her to come forth. They unbuttoned their vests, revealing the symbol on their chest, as Otoha told Tachiki to pledge loyalty to them in order to rise as well. Such a symbol was a magic contract, but it was banned internationally to engrave it on one's body. The woman continued talking, assuring that his loyalty would protect him, and that she could even transfer him to Class D. With that, she sent him off, and hoped he would return with a good answer. As the male walked down the steps, he had a tense aura around him when thinking back on the terms, but that would mean throwing away the relationships he had. This was not an offer he would take, and he didn't want Class E to be looked down upon. Meanwhile, Sota and the others were making progress in their training, and the boy wondered if Umiya wanted to test her limits and fight an orc head-on. They approached the bridge and noticed a figure walking close, only for Sota to realize it was his sister. Kano turned around in surprise, and the dark-haired male was forced to introduce the three girls to each other. The young girl mentioned that she was already training at her age so that she wouldn't falter when being looked down upon by the upper classes after she entered adventurer school, to which Umiya and Risa saw the justification in. Even if that were true, Sota knew that the girl shouldn't be here, since she should be accompanied by one of their parents, and that she promised the boy. Either way, it seemed as though he wasn't victorious in getting Kano to leave, watching as the other girls felt charmed by Kano's cuteness. Suddenly, Risa stood up and said that she was going to the restroom, teasingly telling Sota that a girl shouldn't venture alone. This caused Sota's face to darken, but he eventually complied and walked with the girl in glasses. As they left, Umiya turned to Kano and wondered if the girl noticed Risa and Sota seeming close. Kano seemed happy to believe this theory since she was still unhappy with Kaoru. But the two were not taking anything to the next level. Rather, they were finding a private space to exchange info. Because Sota was able to level Umiya up to level 5, the deal was satisfied, and it was time to tell Sota about the player who gave Kariya the upper hand. This player had been giving Tachigi and the others a plan at each training session, something that Sota was aware of since he had been invited once before, but Risa also believed that the player would be present at that certain place. During another day, Kaoru was waiting in front of the family shop and crossed paths with Kano, who didn't seem happy to see the girl. Kano started to walk in the opposite direction, and mentioned that she would call her brother to tell him of her presence. Sota dressed for the day and told Kaoru that she should have just used the interphone, but she felt as though it would have been rude. As they walked to school, Risa greeted the dark-haired boy and sat next to him, wondering if they were going to practice their swordsmanship. Judging from what Kaoru said, he believed it was mostly going to be about fighting and sharing information about monsters. It is said that it's dangerous to dive into floors with a lack of knowledge, but Risa didn't seem excited about such. Suddenly a voice rang through the air, and a man greeted Risa. He walked toward her as the girl in glasses alerted Sota that this was the guy. He had a confident energy and sat across from the two, acting casual when conversing with Risa. This man was Tsukijima Takuya, and was supposedly the third player according to what Risa mentioned. Tsukijima was a character who also appeared in the game, and apparently remembers every student. However, Risa was a custom character, so Tsukijima likely didn't know any specifics about autopick. The male chuckled, and asked Risa what her relationship was with Sota, since they had been talking a lot, to which Sota awkwardly greeted Tsukijima, as the girl claimed that they were dungeon diving friends. Tsukijima was surprised by her choice and wondered if she was sure of her decision, despite the canon nature of Butao's character. This guy didn't seem to care when openly talking about his game knowledge, remembering that Butao was quite leveled in the game and could be used by them. Risa still kept up the act, and claimed that Sota was a good guy after getting to know him, which wasn't much of a lie. Tsukijima decided to cut to the chase, and asked Risa if she was the one who told Yuma about the sword, surprising Risa that he would talk about such a topic here. He didn't care, since he didn't believe that Butao would understand, but Risa disagreed, and admitted that Tsukijima was more suspicious. She mentioned Tsukijima's action of telling Kariya the countermeasure, and suggested that they should help Yuma for their own benefit. Tsukijima shrugged casually and didn't see the harm, claiming that he was just getting in the way of Yuma's future harem. He admitted that his favorite character was Kaoru, which was surprising for Sota to hear, since this guy was talking so freely like this in front of Kaoru's childhood friend. Risa asked if Tsukijima would help Yuma from now on, but he didn't seem too into the idea, and claimed that he would if he felt like it, since he didn't care about Yuma and the others. The girl in glasses wondered if there was more Tsukijima had to say, but he would keep it a secret unless Risa teamed up and signed a contract with him. With that, Tsukijima stood up and rested a hand on Sota's shoulder, telling him to pretend he didn't hear the conversation. As he left, Sota saw why Risa didn't team up with the guy, since it would potentially put Umiya in danger. Risa was surprised by the nonchalant response, since Tsukijima would potentially get in Sota's way, but the dark-haired male wasn't too alarmed yet, since he wasn't going down a villainous route. Either way, if the story continues in their current situation, Tsukijima would definitely be their enemy. Finally, the training session was going to start, and Yuma called for everyone to gather. The task was to pair up and train while the party and Majima would observe and give coaching. Kaoru apologized for talking down to them, and tried to give reassurance, hoping they would all give their best for the competition. Everyone looked to see who they were paired up with, but Sota felt reluctant with the name he saw, knowing he would train with an important named character, Kuga. He found a spot in the area to train with her, standing opposite to each other as her cold gaze stared him down. Some of the people at the training area were asking Tochigi for pointers with their sparring, while Yuma was getting complimented on his swordsmanship skills. Meanwhile, Kaoru was standing around and observing the place, but overheard some girls whispering to each other and laughing about Kaoru being in the teaching group, still thinking that she had gotten her high level because of the help of Yuma and the others. She frowned and tried to pull herself together by smacking herself in the face. Everyone was taking time off for this training session, so Kaoru didn't want to waste any time, knowing that things needed to be worthwhile for the upcoming class competition. With that, the blue-haired girl went around and corrected people's stances from time to time until she noticed Kuga in the distance looking tense. Kaoru walked up and hesitantly approached the tan-skinned girl, trying to reassure her, but Kuga only glanced forward in silence at Sota, before asking why she should join. The intense gaze of Kuga made Kaoru unable to respond, to which Kuga asked about Kaoru's level. Kaoru admitted that it was 6, but that didn't seem to satisfy Kuga, as she proceeded to walk away and said she was going home for the day, and would have her level raised for the next time. This sudden action confused the blue-haired girl, as Kaoru tried to stop Kuga, so the tan-skinned girl reluctantly tried to compromise, saying she would quickly beat up Sota before going home. Kaoru didn't stop the girl this time, but Kaoru wasn't sure what would occur, since Sota was still a man and was supposedly at a higher level than Kuga. Kuga spun her blade, abruptly stopping it, as Kaoru believed things would be fine. However, the moment she blinked, Kuga was already gone from her original location. She was mid-swing, stopping in front of the dark-haired male, and seemingly using her fists rather than her blade for the sparring match. As Kaoru stared with bewilderment at the speed, Sota was also surprised. It seemed his subtle reaction made Kuga wonder if he was able to see her movement, but he tried to play it off by chuckling nervously and complimenting Kuga's skill. Even though he declined the question, Kaoru still had to process it herself, believing there had to be no way Sota saw Kuga's movement, especially given the fact that she was faster than Yuma, and maybe even as fast as Kariya. Kuga was about to repeat the action again, until Kaoru stepped in to suggest that Kuga should switch partners to prevent Sota from getting hurt. But Kuga only grabbed Kaoru by the neck with one hand and held her up in the air. Sota was shocked by the action, and tried to persuade Kuga to find someone else as well, instead of trying to fight with anyone who tried to sway her decisions. Kaoru struggled in Kuga's grasp and tried to escape, confused at Kuga's power, as she was only supposed to be level 2, and there were no currently known skills to fake one's status. Kuga threw Kaoru across the ground, to which the blue-haired girl softened the blow around her head by wrapping her arms around it. After coughing and getting her breath back, Kaoru stared up at the cold-eyed girl, wondering what was going on, and she was confused as to why she was shaking around Kuga. Suddenly, Kaoru remembered the brief moment when Tochigi asked her to help stop Yuma. To his surprise, Kaoru declined, and claimed that her reasoning was that she couldn't go against the red-haired male because she was charmed by his personality, skill, and resolve. Despite what had been going on, she still admired his continued efforts to get stronger for everyone's sake. Tochigi didn't insist further on getting her to join the plan, but she did mention that she wouldn't get in the male's way, since he was the only one from the start who had seen Yuma from his side. She wouldn't refuse the opportunity to help train their class, but she wouldn't stop the decision. This response making Tochigi huff and call Kaoru annoying. Either way, he agreed with the terms, and said that he would leave the training session up to Kaoru. Remembering her role, Kaoru punched the ground and sat up, while the rest of the people in the training area wondered what was going on. As Kuga told Sota to take his stance, Kaoru repeated the words back in her head. Even if they didn't have any actual major meaning, they were still affecting her. Kuga wasn't an enemy, but if Kaoru backed down, she was going to regret it. She dashed forward and grabbed Kuga by the shoulders, starting to shout instead of being gentle. It was obvious that Kuga didn't want to help the class, believing that it was to be expected given Kuga's strength. The tan-skinned girl was starting to get really irked, calling Kaoru stubborn, as an intimidating aura filled the air, which confused people as to whether it was coming from Kuga or Kaoru. Kaoru persisted, and said that she wanted Kuga's strength for the class competition, admitting that it was true that she wasn't sure they could give Kuga what she wanted, so begging was all she could do. With a simple please to end off Kaoru's speech, Kuga paused, before eventually agreeing and demanding that Kaoru let go. The blue-haired girl did as told and was still bewildered that Kuga actually agreed, to which the tan-skinned girl confirmed as she took off her jacket. Kuga threw it to the side and turned around, realizing that Sota had left while Yuma ran up to check on Kaoru. Somehow, Kaoru didn't know that at the time, in that single moment, she was able to overwhelm a spy from the United States, a superhuman who was over level 20. Tachiki stood at the front of the classroom and reminded everyone it was time for the meeting of their class competition. Another man at the front, Majima Hiroto, spoke up, explaining the competition would be held for 7 days in a dungeon, and could very well lead to death. Even though there would be a difference in power, Majima was confident the higher class ranks likely slacked off due to their egotistical belief of winning. So it was time to prove the higher class ranks wrong. With that motivational speech done with, Tachiki took control of the meeting, mentioning that today's subject was to distribute the information of the events. There were 5 events. Reach the designated point, defeat the designated monster, reach the deepest floor, clear a designated quest, and then total the magic stones collected. Before anything could be discussed on the list, Tachiki immediately told everyone with a blunt tone that the event where they would reach the deepest floor should be given up on, as the other classes had the advantage. Everyone was confused, but it was insisted that they would have the least likeliness to win that event, since the other classes are going to send their main forces for it. Since that specific event is already what a top adventurer would do, the other classes have an advantage, so they were going to focus on the participation that was required. Someone raised their hand and asked why they couldn't just retreat around floor 2, but Kaoru spoke up and explained that they needed to get at least half as deep as the winner. Last year, the winner reached floor 16, so it was going to be a feat this year. Besides the main group, everyone should assume they needed to dive to floor 8 at the very least, and Tachiki and Majima had only reached floor 6 before. Suddenly, someone in the class wondered if they could let the most useless guy keep up with the other classes in order to win the prize. People started to discuss who were the useless guys, mentioning Butao and Kuga. But that was when someone realized Kuga was level 6, so they were already deciding to go with Butao, which Tachiki was shocked about since he had no say in the decision. Sota stayed silent until Kaoru spoke up, saying that they should think about their choice carefully and to not dismiss any possible refusal. Unfortunately, to Kaoru's dismay, Sota raised his hand and agreed, so Majima walked up to give a smile to the pudgy boy and tell him that the future of Classy rested on him. Tachiki spoke up as well. Man, everyone's trying to have their moment, huh? He mentioned how it would be a death wish to go through the challenge alone, especially with someone as weak as Sota. But Sota wasn't alarmed by his role, and was hoping that his volunteering would have let things go smoothly. With that, Kuga stood up and decided to volunteer as well, shocking the rest of the class. But she affirmed her decision and reminded them that they didn't think she'd be of help, and would use this opportunity to prove herself. Inside Sota's mind, he was refusing, but he had no reason to deny the tanned-skinned girl. Everything after that in the meeting went smoothly, and after class, Kuga approached Kaoru and asked if her decision counted as helping, to which the blue-haired girl agreed as so, as Kuga walked off while admitting that she volunteered due to her interest in the boy as well. Umiya sat on a stair and wondered if things were for the best, trying to find acceptance in the current situation. Risa hummed in thought while thinking back to how Tachigi and Majima mentioned that even getting to floor 8 would be a difficult feat for the stronger people of their class, let alone Sota. Even so, Umiya believed there was nothing to worry about, since Kuga would be there to do the work and not have it be suspicious even if Sota went deeper. What the girl didn't know was that Kuga was still going to cause problems due to her secret identity as a spy while alongside Sota. But Umiya still knew that this situation was hard to be put in, with all the expectation of winning being pushed on Sota. Along with that, Yuma's team was having their own discussion, and Tachigi mentioned how that part of the meeting wasn't a good thing. Kaoru agreed, while Yuma himself only thought about how he needed to get stronger and put people at ease. This made Tachigi decide to finally say something, telling the red-haired male that such situations would happen again, even if Yuma's strength did motivate the class. The man with glasses explained that his point was that Yuma was going around in circles, and that while Yuma's principle was good, now was not the time. Yuma frowned at the words being said to him, and asked if they had something to say to him, to which Tachigi apologized before affirming his stance and telling Yuma his performance was dropping. The red-haired male tried to jump in to say that it wouldn't have been a problem for him, but Tachigi admitted that he was worried for the other. Yuma continued to say that they should be blunt about their thoughts towards him, so Tachigi got tired and asked if they should get some exercise together, a quirk of a smile on his lips that might not have been too kind. As Risa and Sota sat together to discuss what they've noticed, there was something that the girl was curious about, that being the atmosphere in the class feeling too evil. She hoped that she was just worried for nothing, but Risa believed that the story was moving similar to how it would when playing as the female protagonist. Because Sota wasn't familiar with the story of the female protagonist, he asked what was going to happen, to which Risa mentioned the duel event between Yuma and Tachigi. Yuma attempted to say that they didn't have time for it, but Tachigi insisted, and said they should have a duel in order to prove that Yuma's problem was affecting him. The red-haired male agreed, and Sakurako chimed in with concern at their behavior, while Kaoru stared intently and told the two to state it clearly that they were going to duel. Both men affirmed that they were dueling. However, someone seemed to overhear the conversation and proceeded to run off. Tachigi recognized the footsteps as belonging to Takeda, the one girl that had a vendetta against Kaoru and would gossip amongst the classmates. Kaoru remembered what the girl had done to her and ran off to chase her with a worried expression. Meanwhile, Sota and Risa were still discussing with each other at the bench. Risa mentioned that it was a side event that hopefully wouldn't affect the main scenario, but she doesn't know what will happen next if it does happen. She believed that this occurred due to Sota losing to a slime, and that originally the situation was so bad that someone became a good scapegoat that accelerated the worsening of the public order. Even though Risa had a bit of influence in the class, she tried to keep it within the rules. Kaoru chased after Takeda, calling after her and hoping that she would catch her. But it was too late, and the girl slammed the door open, announcing that Tachigi and Yuma were going to have a duel. Majima, along with the rest of the class, was shocked to hear such news, while Takeda would continue and explain that she heard that it was because of the differentiating goals of how to direct the class. People already started to theorize why, and thought that the party was trying to be above the class, only for Kaoru to finally reach the classroom and call out to Takeda. The girl spun around with a weary smile and asked what was wrong, but the question couldn't be answered, as many more students spoke up to ask their own frantic questions. Kaoru narrowed her eyes with a frown and asked Takeda why she would cause this tension, especially since it was all a misunderstanding, given the care that the two males had for the class. A desk was kicked to the side, and Takeda suddenly became apologetic and meek, dropping to the floor to bow. She trembled and begged for Kaoru and the others to not look down on their class, since they've all already been looked down upon by so many other classes. Takeda claimed that she was truly happy when she was accepted to the school, not enjoying how things were starting to turn out. Majima jumped into the situation in an attempt to reprimand the girl, but Kaoru stopped him from saying anything further. A classmate called for Kaoru's attention and mentioned feeling empathy for Takeda's feelings, knowing that Kaoru and the others were trying to lead the way, but their decisions and actions came off the wrong way, ending up making the class feel smaller. As the other three walked into the classroom, the classmate finished off his words by apologizing and saying that he wouldn't obey the group if this system kept going. This gave some clarity to Kaoru, knowing that she was the one who was convinced she was the only weak one, but realizing that she never considered how the rest of the class felt. With that, the blue-haired girl got onto the ground to bow as well, deciding to be upfront about her own insecurities. She admitted that she was always worried about her strength and hated feeling weak and having a weak mentality, along with some dispositions about other qualities of herself. In conclusion, Kaoru admitted to her self-hatred, but the girl told Takeda that it didn't matter if everyone was suffering because to Takeda, her own problems were the most important. In order for Kaoru to stop the self-hatred, she will keep doing the right things. However, Kaoru still asked if Takeda could accept the group from now on, along with allowing Takeda to not have to worry about her problems alone. This kindness caused Takeda to tear up and seemingly not be against Kaoru's offer, so Kaoru turned toward Yuma and Tachigi, who agreed to go forth with the current situation. Kaoru announced with clarity that the two were going to duel, and that after the end of the battle, people had the choice to follow or leave, but that at least everyone should come watch. Sota overheard this in the hallway and followed the rest of the class to the sparring arena, where Yuma and Tachigi were preparing for the duel. Tachigi apologized for accidentally forcing Kaoru to play a major role in all this, but the girl dismissed him and said that she would do anything if it was for the good of the class. Along with that, she didn't believe that she did much at the moment since everyone still feels tense, so it was Tachigi who was going to decide the future of the class. With that, the two stood opposite of each other, and Tachigi asked the red-haired male if he was going to change his mind. Yuma paused for a moment before insisting his decision, to which Tachigi did as well, and so, the duel was ready to begin. It seemed as though Sota decided to watch the duel from the distance. He was near the entrance to the arena, glancing over when he noticed Risa approaching him. He asked the girl if Takeda was going to be fine, since Risa was the one who was comforting Takeda prior, to which Risa sat down to give her response. Takeda had calmed down for now, but Risa overheard Takeda admitting to having just followed Yuma and the others in a random spur of the moment. This was when Takeda overheard the entire discussion of the group, finally realizing that she shouldn't be hearing any of the words and running off while Kaoru chased her. It was likely the case that Takeda hated the current situation enough to spontaneously decide to gossip, causing more tension in the class as a way to let off steam for Takeda's unresolved issues. This was her reward, a way to make things worth it. Sota did see the justification, since it would be difficult to recover from such stress right away, so it was human nature to sometimes not want to recover at all when in an environment like the school. Risa stared with a sweat drop and tense silence, confusing Sota, until she mentioned he sounded old with his response. Meanwhile, the crowd gathered around to watch, and Sakurako felt uneasy about the incoming duel, trembling with worry while clasping her hands together. Kaoru told the girl she didn't need to watch, but Sakurako insisted. She wanted to see it through, surprising Kaoru. With that, it was time, and the blue-haired girl asked if both males were ready. They affirmed, and the duel began. Yuma immediately ran forward, holding the blade at his side at a swift speed and seemingly almost letting the sword hit. Tachigi quickly used his staff to stun the red-haired male and ran around to try and get another attack, only for Tachigi's foot to be blocked by Yuma's blade. A fire arrow was shot from Tachigi's staff, exploding when hitting Yuma's face, but it seemed to only give a flinching effect. The male shook off the attack casually by apologizing for not being focused, so both men silently prepared themselves once more. Risa approached Majima and asked the taller male if he could copy the moves, only causing him to get upset even if he admitted in the end he couldn't. For physical strength, he was definitely stronger than Yuma, but he was confident that he couldn't imitate the mobility and calm, collected reaction time the two had. Majima knew that Tachigi would respond accordingly as well, especially since the reality was clear when one was a support adventurer. It was believed by Majima that Tachigi could only keep up with Yuma due to his martial arts and skills, at least until Majima realized something about Yuma. He wondered if Yuma was looking weaker, to which Risa knew Majima finally realized the current situation. That didn't answer Risa's confusion, with everyone's lack of attention to Yuma's mental and physical state, especially since the other students should have pretty sharp observation skills. Still, Risa felt as though Majima over-explained and could have summarized. Back to the duel, the two clashed weapons, and Tachigi's staff was swung and had barely missed Yuma. Tachigi then tried to give a kick at the red-haired male, but that was the distraction, as he took off and threw his jacket as a way to obscure Yuma's sight. This gave Tachigi the opportunity to shoot another fire arrow, which slightly singed the shoulder area of Yuma's clothes. Tachigi didn't aim as perfectly on purpose, because he hated seeing people get hurt, So the male wondered why Yuma accepted the duel knowing that. They both talked about someday being the ideal adventurer, but things had gone too far downhill, making Tochigi feel frustrated and admit he couldn't follow Yuma with the way he currently was. When it was that previous day early in the school year, everyone in the class felt so tense and powerless, and didn't seem to have enough motivation to speak up and protect Sakurako against the moves being made on her. It seemed as though Tochigi was slowly stepping out of his chair in a silent manner, driven by his desire to do something about the situation, but he didn't know if he could do much to win. What was happening was most likely just a showcase of skills, and Tochigi didn't want to prove himself as one of the strongest in case it would keep the target focused on him. Everyone lost their willpower to fight back because of the aura skill, so the male continued to think about the best course of action, held back by hesitation due to the power gap. That was when someone jumped out of their desk and firmly placed their hand on Dekura's wrist. Despite the strong hand and confident motion, there was still a faint sound of fear. That wasn't recklessness, that was bravery. Yuma stood there knowing fully well about the situation. Tochigi saw Yuma as someone who was tough, someone who could go far in life and be an everlasting flame chasing ideals. Yet here we are. Back to the current events of the duel, Tochigi called out and asked Yuma if he was going to yield, remembering that one woman he went to for guidance only to be demanded for loyalty. He asked Yuma what he wanted to do, to which the red-haired male gripped his blade with narrowed eyes. Tochigi felt as though his friend was hiding something, but that thought had to be put on pause, as Yuma charged forward and suddenly leaped into the air as if to do an attack from above. Since it was a very wide lack of defense, Tochigi easily aimed his staff to shoot a fire arrow Yuma's way. At least, that would have worked if it weren't for Yuma's double stinger attack, that seemed to leave the male unaffected by the fire arrow, and able to barely miss Tochigi when landing. Things seemed to be going decently, since Tochigi was able to keep up with Yuma's moves and mild damage, so Tochigi wanted to focus on making calculated moves, not letting himself have a second of silence to himself. As Yuma ran forward, it was almost as if time slowed down due to the quick thinking Tochigi was doing. He analyzed his own state compared to Yuma's, theorizing and predicting the others' patterns. As they clashed once more, and likely again and again while the class watched from the sidelines, a winner was finally found. Yuma could be seen collapsed on the ground, exhausted, the two men panting heavily. When the winner was announced, Kaoru and Sakurako ran up to heal the two as quickly as possible. Tochigi spoke up and asked if Yuma really meant his words about wanting strength to put people at ease, to which the red-haired male affirmed. But he admitted that he truly was weak. When Yuma lost to Kariya, it was truly frustrating, so it made Yuma start to wish for power. He would use people as an excuse, but it only made his insecurities clear. He was turning a blind eye to his own pain and the feelings of everyone else. With that apology, Tochigi mentioned that Yuma should be more open about his issues, since people don't know what's going on if it isn't talked about. Tochigi apologized as well for making things dramatic and having this duel happen. But he did win, so he hoped that Yuma would agree to mull over their feelings more, and make their ideals become a reality someday. With that, the duel was over with, so Tochigi turned toward the rest of the class who still stood at the sidelines and got their attention. Tochigi was reasonably a little hesitant at first, since there had been growing tensions in the system they had, but he continued his words. He won this battle with the class's principal on the line, and since he might come off as condescending, he'll keep his next words short. Everyone took the test at the school for all sorts of reasons, and it was true that hurdles had to be jumped to get the students enrolled here. Everyone had their despair, their struggles, their unresolved issues not just before, but also increased when having to survive and grow in the school's system. They didn't have the connections nor the experience, and all they could do was struggle, trying to win certain people over or just dropping out. Tochigi gave the class the choice to do either of those things, and that no matter what was chosen, the one at fault for their suffering was the academy. Even so, that was a bad ending, and Tochigi didn't want to hear that. He tightened his fist and begged the rest of the class, knowing that it was up to individual choice instead of being forced into following his guidance. Tochigi's ideal was for everyone to graduate with a smile on their face, so he asked if anyone would still help him make such a thing a reality. A tense silence filled the room, hesitation on everyone's faces, until Risa broke the silence by clasping her hands together and saying it wasn't too late for everyone to give it their all for the class competition starting from now. She turned to Tochigi to affirm her perspective, which he did. Yuma decided to join in as well and gave her a genuine look when begging as well. This behavior surprising Majima. Sota spontaneously decided to speak up as well to help with the situation, seemingly apologizing on behalf of the class and admitting that they were also all frustrated and weren't honest to themselves, to which his response caught the attention of Kaoru. More people started to speak up with apologies and compliments on Tochigi's fighting ability, the tension slowly dissipating as it felt more supportive and considerate, as people even apologized to Sota, likely for their collective bullying throughout the school term. Everyone truly felt inspired after the duel, and Umiya gave a little cheer, agreeing that they should give it their all for the upcoming competition in just a little over a week. People cheered as well, and Takeda seemingly had a subtle smile at the conclusion, despite her exhausted eyes. Yuma's party stood together with contentment on their faces, but Sakurako seemed to surprise the three by collapsing to the ground without warning. She apologized for making them worry, but reassured she was just so relieved that her body finally responded to the exhaustion within her, and while she didn't have much involvement in fixing things, she was still confident in giving it her all as well. Yuma outstretched a hand for the pink-haired girl to hold on to, helping her up, giving her words of encouragement that they were counting on her as well. The sun started to set, and Sota and Risa could be seen walking down the block, giving their reflections about the duel. Sota spoke up first and wondered what Risa thought about the conclusion, and if they still had the chance of surviving the competition or even the event happening at all. It was clear that some of the details of the game were different, but Risa believed it would mostly be alright. Even so, they couldn't afford to relax. Sota felt calmer at Risa's opinion, thanking her and saying he would be in her care for the competition. She frowned at his words, seemingly annoyed that he was implying that he was making her do all the major work, telling him to also do his best. Down in the dungeon on floor 7, some students were fighting against a very large and powerful tree monster. They were a little hesitant, and had their guard up due to the power of the enemy, and especially because a wrong move could lead to real casualties. Suddenly, a large rock was thrown past the group and toward the tree monster, the culprit being Karia. With that, it was stunned, and the group could successfully charge and aim for the core. Once it was defeated, the corpse was seen slowly dissipating as the group took a break to catch their breath. During this, Dekura's brother, Masaru, entered the place and greeted everyone. Karia acted very formal to Masaru, who welcomed more of the praise, but Dekura was curious as to why his brother finally had the time to come to the dungeon, especially when Masaru was the person who found that place. Masaru claimed that he was busy with something else, mentioning the name Sorrel and explaining that it was a clan right under the rank of the clan of the Golden Orchid Association. Since floor 7 was found, Sorrel's position quickly rose thanks to the finding. With that, the leader got a promotion as an executive at the Golden Orchid. In exchange, one of the people from there would personally supervise Sorrel. There were a bunch more things that needed to be done, but there wasn't much time. Dekura felt excited and hoped that the Golden Orchid would help them in the class competition. Masaru affirmed and said they should look forward to it, to which Karia bowed once more and thanked the older male. Meanwhile, Kaoru's group was making progress through the 6th floor, easily defeating the wargs that they would encounter. It seemed all the fighting also led to them reaching level 7, but Sakurako noticed the time, so Yuma suggested that it was time to go home. They had an early morning tomorrow, so it was best to use their current time to rest in advance. But Kaoru snuck in a response that mentioned how blatant Yuma was. With that, they all walked home, while other classmates and people would finish off their own training within the next few days. Then it was time. The class competition starts. An armored person walked through the dusty area, followed by a large, lion-like and dragon-like creature, which immediately charged and attempted to devour the person. Within seconds, the creature was defeated and sliced into multiple pieces, almost without a clear sense of what happened. The day before the class competition, Risa, Umiya, and Sota made their way to the 10th floor at Obaba's shop. Everyone watched as the dark-haired boy and his little sister dueled against each other. Kano charged forth and tried to swing her fist at Sota's face, but he caught the attack in midair, pulling at her arm and swinging the blade, while she was hopefully unable to escape the incoming attack. Suddenly, the little sister seemed to spontaneously twist her body around, leaping into the air and dodging the attack. With that, she thought she was about to give the final blow, attacking from the air with a confident smile. Unfortunately for her, she was countered and sent to plunge her body into the ground. This called for a win for Sota, and this also meant that Kano's wish to join and help for the class competition was ruined. Kano tried to throw a tantrum and begged for Umiya and Arisa to do something about this. However, Sota insisted it would be a bad idea to help out, since Kaoru would be in the competition as well. The girl huffed with a pout, complaining about Kaoru, but Umiya jumped in to agree with Sota, since Kano was already breaking a separate other rule in the world and dungeon diving despite her age and status. Since Kano was officially not going to help out, Sota was going to put away the mask he had that would have helped her conceal her identity. It was initially reserved just in case others might find it, but it's not needed anymore after the duel. Sota remembered something else to ask about, asking Risa about Tsukishima. It seemed as though the male truly believed that he and Risa were the only ones who survived the beta test, and claimed as though it were somehow a blessing. He also asked Risa if they could team up, which she struggled to refuse since it was hard to dodge the question. Sota was about to believe that was unrealistic, but he changed his mind and knew that he likely would have thought the same if Kano and him weren't there. The dark-haired male told Risa that she helped him a lot, but she didn't care too much for the gratitude, and mentioned she was counting on him too, which he understood. There was a reason why Sota volunteered himself in the event. One of said reasons was because he was a high level and would be safe, that reason being one he told Umiya. The real reason was to see what the upper classes were doing, since Class E barely had any opportunities to see the school's main force in action, especially the top seat, Sera Kikyo. Depending on which route one takes in the game, she could be a friend or foe, so he was wanting to see for himself how it would turn out. During Sota's likely exciting thoughts, Risa noticed his facial expression and tried to ask, but it seemed he was too stuck in a trance because Serakikyo was his favorite character in the game. The demonic woman had her attention called by Kano, who asked about reserving the equipment just a little longer. But why would she do that? Who knows? Finally, it was the day of the class competition. The teacher told everyone that they could leave after downloading the application, and that everyone should gather at the plaza at 10. He proceeded to leave the class in silence, only for the class to suddenly erupt in a loud and frantic questioning toward Umiya, asking her details about the helper, and obviously only interested if they were a possible love interest to their own self. Yuma approached Majima and said that he would leave it to everyone, showing his development and actually relying on others instead of taking it all on his own, to which Majima said that he would be counting on Yuma for the checkpoint. Within the class, Sota finally took his seat, but he was approached by Kaoru, who frantically told him he should retire if things got dangerous, since he was at a level that would be hard to traverse past even floor 6 with. At least that was what Sota thought would happen. What he didn't expect was the blue-haired girl to outstretch and rest her fist on Sota's chest, hoping that the dark-haired male would have good luck during the competition. It was almost unlike her in Sota's perspective, making the boy wonder why things were continuing to go against his expectations instead of just according to the canon of the game. At the plaza in front of the guild, everyone gathered, and people were called forth based on which event they were attending. Those participating in the deepest floor event were called, and Sota was among the many who walked alongside the many others. One of those people being that very girl that Sota favored from the game. For Yuma, his goal was to reach the designated point. For Majima, it was to defeat the designated monster. For Risa and Tochiki, it was to clear the designated quest. For Kaoru, Sakurako, Umiya, and Tsukishima, it was to get the total amount of needed magic stones. And as for Sota and Sera, and Kuga, it was to reach the deepest floor. Sota finally remembered that Kuga was tagging along, since she had volunteered as well, but it was likely related to their sparring match and that she wanted to measure his true power. The tension was slightly relieved by the full-armored gal who ran up and greeted Sota happily. Since this event was to reach the deepest floor, it was expected that a powerful person like Tenma would join. Tenma leaned close with an inquisitive pose, seemingly observing Sota while humming in thought. She leaned in even closer and bluntly asked if he had lost some weight, confusing him, as she explained that she noticed his core was different. He wondered how to answer since he couldn't just reveal he was level 20, but he wasn't able to say anything until Tenma grabbed his hand and dragged him along the way, calling Kuga to come along as well. Where Tenma brought the male was near where Sera was, and the girl greeted Sota since he seemed to be friends with Tenma. The dark-haired male was still in a trance due to his own feelings from his previous life, staring at Sera with awe. She seemed to use a skill on the boy, clairvoyance, an ability to see the target's future. Sota felt honored to experience it, and was curious about his future, only to get disappointed when she mentioned it involved harassment, the sight disappointing her as well, as she walked away without another word. The dark-haired male felt almost like he wanted to cry, while Kuga stared with narrowed eyes, and Tenma patted him on the back, as he wondered what Seta even meant. Either way, the competition began. In Sota's event, they would travel with other classes to the upper floors, but that was just an unspoken rule about the event. Other than Kuga, Sota believed that he wouldn't be questioned if he dived moderately. Tenma still wanted to get an answer out of Sota regarding the earlier conversation, but he still dodged the answer and tried to focus on his goal to reach floor 10 and get the participation prize. Class A was really solid thanks to Seta and Tenma. Their presence almost overkill. Class B's leader, Suo, was also participating and was fully determined to win, but Sota would have to be careful around her, since she was hostile toward Yuma. Class C's leader wasn't participating, and neither was the leader of Class E, so they were likely focusing on other events. For Class D, there were only 4 of Kadia's henchmen who had been stealing glances for a while, making Sota wonder if he was being targeted to carry their stuff. Either way, the main goal was to reach floor 10, but will he be able to endure all this? At the second floor, there was a break, but Sota and Kuga seemed to have been called to follow a group of people without any warning. When led into an alleyway, one of the people punched Sota, who was sent flying to the ground. Kuga watched with unamusement, as the dark-haired male feigned confusion and meekness, hearing the group say that his interactions with Tenma didn't mean that he wasn't going to be an equal to them. Sota was surprised to see that the group was quite irritated. At least, usually not this violent and without hesitation. They should all be around level 7 to 8, but the punch was still quite powerful, meaning that there could be an item used to buff themselves. It wouldn't help to fight back, but it would feel unnatural to let them beat him up. So he decided to run like a madman, hoping that he would also shake off Kuga as well. Sota guessed that the group had the Mad Rat's Fang, which would lower intelligence but increase strength. In the main story, Suo would give such an item to her subordinates, making Class D her experiments. If that's the case, Sota wanted to make it seem like the item's side effect and knock them out. That was when he hesitated, wondering if it was enough or even right to settle problems with his fists. He remembered doing so when protecting Umiya, but he wondered every day if there was really a better method. As the group charged forward, he didn't have to do anything, since Tenma came in for the rescue and ordered the group to stop. Tenma wondered if Sota was about to purposefully let them hit him, to which he had no hesitation to affirm as so. Suddenly, the full-armored gal mentioned her history with struggling to lose weight, which led to the armor. But this also meant she had the determination to fight against absurdities. With a confident tone, Tenma told Sota that she would protect him until he had no more doubts. This behavior surprising him, since he always had to hold back his doubts. Maybe it's fine to have a bit of doubt for once. As the group was tied up, Sota believed it was alright to tell someone as strong as Tenma the reason he lost weight, this offer exciting her greatly.